When I was 10, my dad had left us 2 years earlier. Mom worked night shifts at the hospital, so she was gone most nights. Richard, my older brother, was supposed to watch me. He was 14 and mostly just stayed in his room on his phone or with his headphones on. I remember it was a Thursday night in October. The heater made the whole house dry, and the street outside was empty except for the trees shaking in the wind. I was in bed, reading the same comic book for the third time, the one about the dog detective, when I heard the front gate squeak open. I knew that sound because it always stuck, and Mom kept saying she'd get it fixed, but she never did. I looked up. Sometimes the wind pushed the gate, but tonight the wind wasn't that strong. I rolled out of bed and crept to my window, pushing aside the plastic blinds. Under the streetlight, right by our mailbox, a man was standing. Not walking past, not checking for mail, just standing there like he was waiting for something. He had a jacket with the hood up. He didn't move for a while. Just stood there with his hands in his pockets, head tipped back, like he was staring at our roof or counting the windows. I tried to tell myself he was just lost, but he didn't look lost. He looked like he was counting or memorizing something. He glanced up at Richard's room, then at mine, then at the kitchen. Every time his head moved, it did so slow and careful, like he was trying to remember what he saw. He took a step closer to the fence and leaned over, but didn't open it. He just stood, eyes tracing every window with light behind it. My heart started beating hard. I thought maybe he was looking for someone, but he wasn't calling out, and he wasn't moving on. He just kept standing there, face shadowed by his hood, making small movements with his head. I felt weird watching him, but I didn't want to look away. He shifted his feet, glanced up at the dark windows on the second floor, then stared straight at me. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then he kept looking. I ducked down fast, breathing shallow. My hands felt cold. I waited, thinking he'd leave. I counted to 20, then peeked again. He was still there, but now he was looking at the front porch. Our porch light was off, but the bulb flickered when it got cold, making this faint blue glow. The man reached up, grabbed the mailbox and rattled it just once. He let go and stepped back. My fingers were shaking as I backed away from the window and hurried down the hall. I ran straight to Richard's room. His door was half open. He had his headphones in, watching something on his phone. I told him someone was outside, by the mailbox. He didn't look up. He just said, "Probably the mailman." I said it was almost midnight, and the mailman never came after dark. He rolled his eyes, told me I was being paranoid, but I grabbed his arm and pulled him to my room anyway. I told him to look for himself. We got to my window and peeked out. The man was moving, walking along the path to our front porch. Richard saw him too, and his face changed. He went pale, mouth hanging open. He dropped his phone on the bed and ducked back, pulling me with him. For a second, neither of us said anything. I could hear Richard's breathing, quick and loud. He grabbed his own phone and called Mr. Thompson, our neighbor across the street. Mr. Thompson used to be a cop. He picked up right away, and Richard's voice shook as he tried to explain, saying, "There's a guy outside, walking to our porch. We don't know who he is." Mr. Thompson's voice was calm, but I could hear every word. He told Richard not to go near the windows, not to open any doors, and he'd be right over. He said to keep the lights off and stay low. We turned out the bedroom light and sat on the floor in the dark. I tried not to move, listening for footsteps on the porch. Every creak in the house sounded loud, even the refrigerator clicking on downstairs. I kept thinking I heard shoes scraping on the wooden steps, but it could have just been my own heartbeat. We waited in the dark, backs against the bed, listening for anything at all. Mr. Thompson showed up about 5 minutes after Richard called. his big German shepherd on a leash and a heavy flashlight in his other hand. He didn't even knock, just let himself in through the front door like we'd agreed a long time ago if there was ever trouble. We could see his flashlight beam bouncing around outside from my bedroom window before he even reached our porch. The dog sniffed every bush and corner, hackles up, tail stiff, looking for any sign of the man. Richard and I watched through a crack in the curtain while Mr. Thompson walked the whole yard, shining his light under the porch, behind the trash cans, along the fence line. After 10 minutes, he called us downstairs. He'd found 2 cigarette butts pushed into the dirt under the back fence and a set of footprints in the flower bed below my bedroom window. Deep, fresh, and definitely adult-sized. He pointed them out to us, the shape clear in the mud where the man must have stood, looking right up at my window while I was reading earlier. Mr. Thompson crouched by the prints and frowned, then told us to go back inside and lock every door behind us. When he came in, his voice was quiet but steady. He said, "You two did the right thing tonight." But this wasn't random. We stood in the kitchen, Richard still holding the phone. Mr. Thompson told us that, for the last few months, there'd been break-ins in our neighborhood and in the next one over. All the targeted houses were like ours. Single mothers, kids at home in the evening, no adult men. He said the police believed whoever was behind it was always watching first, figuring out routines, looking for easy targets. Most break-ins happened on nights when the mothers were working late, just like that night with our mom gone. Mr. Thompson's eyes were tired, and the dog stayed close by, ears perked. He said, "I think you've been watched for longer than you know." Mr. Thompson called our mom at the hospital so she wouldn't be surprised coming home. He stayed with us the rest of the night, sitting in the living room with his dog by his feet, lights off except for a lamp. Every so often, he'd get up and check the locks, shining his light out into the dark. Richard and I lay on the couch, not really talking, both listening for any new noise outside. Time passed slow. We didn't sleep much, and neither did Mr. Thompson. Mom came in just after 6 in the morning, keys rattling in the door, eyes already wide when she saw Mr. Thompson there with us. He explained everything to her, starting with what Richard and I saw and ending with the footprints and cigarette butts. I watched her face change, shock, worry, anger, something like fear, then just pure determination. She didn't hug us or cry. She just asked if we were okay and told us she was proud we stayed together and called for help. The sun came up while Mr. Thompson walked through the house with her, showing her the places the man could have watched from. He promised to stay until she got a few hours of sleep, and he did, sitting in the kitchen, arms crossed, the dog at his feet. When he finally left, it was daylight, and everything outside looked normal again. Within a week, Mom had arranged for a security company to come out and install cameras all around the house, pointed at the driveway, front door, both side yards, and the back fence where the footprints had been. She paid extra to have an alarm system hooked straight to the local police station. She changed all the locks and put bars on the basement windows. Every night, she went around double-checking everything herself. Mr. Thompson didn't stop helping either. He called a meeting for all the single parents on our street and started a neighborhood watch. They traded phone numbers and set up a routine for checking in every night, especially when someone had to work late or leave kids home. Some neighbors started leaving their porch lights on all night. People watched out for each other in a way I'd never seen before. Mom also went to her supervisor and changed her work schedule. She took fewer night shifts, even though it meant less money, so she could be home with us more often. Richard and I still stayed home alone sometimes, but never as late, and never without a plan. We had a list of emergency numbers taped by the phone, and Mr. Thompson showed us where he kept his spare key in case we ever needed to get to his place fast. That man never came back. But the cameras picked up 2 different men walking slowly past our house in the weeks after, one at midnight, the other just before dawn. Neither stayed long, just stopped and stared at the door or looked at the mailbox. Mom sent the footage to the police, who said it was good we'd taken action so fast. Richard and I didn't sleep well for a long time, always listening for sounds at the windows. Months later, the police told Mom they believed the quick call to Mr. Thompson and how fast we all responded probably stopped a break-in or worse. They said there had been other reports on our street, people seeing strange men, cigarette butts found by bedroom windows, muddy footprints in yards where no one had been. Nothing had been stolen in our house, but I knew we'd gotten lucky. I kept thinking about how easy it would have been for someone to come inside when no one was watching. Years passed, and we moved away when Richard graduated high school. But the memory of that night, and the days that followed, never really faded. I'm 32 now, with kids of my own. I still get anxious whenever I see someone standing too long by a house with toys in the yard or peeking over fences where kids play. I always watch, just in case. Some people don't stop after one failed attempt. They just look for another window, another house, a place where someone is a little less careful. I make sure my kids know what to do, how to stay safe, and I never leave a light burned out or a gate unlocked. Not after that night. I was 17 the first time I babysat for the Robinsons. They lived in a newer split level about 3 blocks from my parents' place. Their son Tommy was 6, a little shy, but he listened, so it was easy money. Most weeks it was just a few hours here or there, sometimes a Friday or a Saturday night if they had an event. That Tuesday, Mrs. Robinson called me in the afternoon and asked if I could come over at 6. She said she and Mr. Robinson had a corporate dinner downtown and would be back by 11. I agreed, walked over after dinner, and let myself in. Tommy was in the living room, building a Lego spaceship on the rug, and Mrs. Robinson was already at the door with her coat. She gave me the usual rundown. Snacks in the pantry, TV off by 8, Tommy in bed by 8:30. She handed me $40, told me not to open the door for anyone, and said they both had their phones if I needed anything. Mr. Robinson honked from the driveway, and a minute later, they were both gone. Tommy and I ate popcorn and watched a cartoon. Around 8, I helped him brush his teeth and tucked him in, turning on the nightlight. He wanted his stuffed dog, which I found under the bed. Then I left the door open a crack and headed back down. The house was quiet. I started picking up, folded the blanket, tossed popcorn crumbs, and gathered Tommy's Legos into the plastic bin. That's when I saw the black cell phone on the coffee table. It was just sitting there, next to a stack of coloring books. I don't remember seeing it earlier, and I'm pretty sure Tommy didn't have one. I thought maybe Mr. Robinson left a work phone, but both of them had their usual phones when they left. I picked it up. The case was smooth, matte black, with no stickers or anything. The phone wasn't locked, but the screen was dark. I set it back down, figuring maybe one of them had an extra for work. For the next hour, I just kept busy. Washed a few dishes, scrolled through my phone, flipped channels. It rained outside, hard, the wind making the gutters rattle. Around 9:30, just as I was considering making some tea, the black phone rang. The screen lit up, glowing in the dark room, and the caller ID said, "Unknown." I hesitated. Usually, I'd never answer a phone that wasn't mine, but something about it made me uneasy. I picked it up. The voice on the other end said, "Hello, this is Mr. Robinson. We're coming home early. There's been a change. You need to leave the house now." The voice was low, almost too deep, and spoke with a little bit of an accent I didn't recognize. It didn't sound like Mr. Robinson. I asked, "Is everything okay? Should I wait for you?" The man got impatient, said, "No, you need to leave right away. It's important. There's been an emergency." I looked at the clock. Still 90 minutes until the Robinsons were supposed to be back. I said, "I'll wait until you're here, just like we planned. I need to make sure Tommy's okay." The man said nothing for a second, then hissed, "You have to go. Now." I hung up and set the phone down, keeping my eyes on the door. I called Mr. Robinson first, then Mrs. Robinson, both on their regular numbers, but neither of them picked up. I tried twice more, my hands getting sweaty. The street outside was empty, just the sound of rain against the windows. 10 minutes went by, and I tried to distract myself by folding some laundry from the dryer, but I kept glancing at the black phone on the table. At 9:45, it rang again. I stared at the screen, saw unknown flashing, and didn't want to answer, but I did. The same man's voice came through, sharper now. "Why are you still there? Leave the child and get out." He sounded angry, less like someone worried and more like someone giving orders. "I told you already," he said. "You need to go home now. Don't make this harder." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not leaving. The Robinsons will be home soon." He let out a sound like a sigh, then hung up. I turned the phone off and shoved it into a kitchen drawer, heart pounding. I went through the house, checking all the doors and windows, locking the back slider and double-checking the latch on the side door. Every room looked normal, but the quiet felt wrong now, like the air was heavier. I took a flashlight from under the sink and sat in the hallway, where I could see both Tommy's door and the front door at the same time. I kept watching the driveway through the curtains, waiting for headlights, but there was nothing. I thought I saw a shadow by the hedges once, but when I looked again, it was gone. I kept the porch light on and listened for footsteps, but only the rain and wind moved. The rest of the night crawled by. I kept replaying the voice on the phone, the way he said, "Leave the child," the way he seemed to know I would listen. At 10:30, I texted Mrs. Robinson again. I didn't hear back, but I saw a car drive by slowly, then speed up at the end of the street. I wrote down the time and tried not to let my mind jump to worst-case scenarios. I stayed in the hallway, flashlight in one hand, my own phone in the other, ready to call 911 if anyone tried the door. At exactly 11, I heard keys in the lock and the front door opened. Mr. and Mrs. Robinson stepped in, shaking the rain from their jackets. Mrs. Robinson looked tired. Mr. Robinson carried his briefcase and umbrella. I stood up right away, probably looking wild-eyed. "Something weird happened," I said, and I handed them the black phone from the drawer. I told them about the calls, the man pretending to be Mr. Robinson, the way he insisted I leave Tommy alone and go home. Mrs. Robinson went straight up the stairs to check on Tommy, while Mr. Robinson listened, then took out his own phone and called the police. It didn't take long for a patrol car to show up. The officer came inside, careful with his boots, and listened to what happened while Mr. Robinson explained how they'd both had their phones with them all night. The officer took notes and asked me to show him the black phone. He put on gloves, bagged it, and said there had been a few cases like this recently. "We're seeing more of these tactics," he said. "People planting phones to try and get babysitters out of the house. They want the kids alone." Mrs. Robinson came back down and hugged Tommy tight, thanking me for not leaving. The officer dusted the phone for prints, took statements, and gave me a card with his name on it. He told me I'd done the right thing, that staying had probably stopped something much worse from happening. A week later, Mr. Robinson called my parents to explain what the police had found. It turned out the phone was planted during a delivery that afternoon. The delivery driver dropped off a package, and while Mrs. Robinson was outside signing, security footage from a neighbor's camera showed a man walking up the driveway right after the truck pulled away. He slipped in through the unlocked garage side door, was inside less than a minute, and left before anyone noticed. 3 other families in the neighborhood reported the same thing that month. Someone following deliveries, sneaking in, planting a phone or some other distraction. In 2 cases, the babysitter got scared by a fake call and left early, leaving the kids alone until the parents got home. Nothing happened, but it was enough to scare everybody. After that night, I never babysat without double-checking that I had all the family's real phone numbers saved and a plan for emergencies written down. I always locked every door behind me, and if something felt off, I didn't ignore it. Looking back, I'm glad I trusted my gut, even if I felt silly at the time. Sometimes there's no obvious reason for a bad feeling, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Predators count on people being polite, on them not wanting to cause a scene. If you feel like something is wrong, act on it, no matter what. That's the only thing that kept Tommy safe. I worked security at Texas University, patrolling the engineering building during evening shifts from 6 to midnight. The place was quiet after dark, echoing footsteps in empty halls and the buzz of vending machines the only sounds. My job was simple. Just check doors, flip lights off in rooms, and write down any names if I found a student asleep or hanging around after hours. Most nights, I listened to music through one earbud, or scrolled through my phone when I got bored. I'd walk each floor twice, once around 8, and again closer to midnight, just before my shift ended. The engineering building was new, all glass walls and long fluorescent lights that made the linoleum floors shine. The 4th floor had labs on one side and classrooms on the other, but by 11, nobody was ever up there except for the janitor, who usually finished by 10. That Wednesday felt normal. The sky outside was still bright from the city lights, and the hallways were clean, the whiteboards erased, desks stacked neatly. I wrote in my logbook as I walked, the same as always. Around 11, I started my last walkthrough of the 4th floor. The carpet muffled my steps, and I could smell the faint scent of ammonia from where someone had just mopped. As I passed room 410, I heard footsteps ahead of me. They weren't slow and steady like mine. They sounded rushed, the sound bouncing off the walls, getting quieter as they moved away. I looked up and saw a tall guy in a denim jacket at the far end of the hallway, walking quickly toward the stairwell. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his head was down like he didn't want to look at anyone. There were always grad students staying late, so at first, I figured he was just trying to finish something and go home. But something about him felt wrong. Most people look up or wave if they see security, but he just kept his eyes on the floor. He walked faster when I glanced at him, like he didn't want to be recognized. I made a note in my book. 11:06 p.m., male, denim jacket, 4th floor, walking fast, no ID visible. It was probably nothing, but I like to have a record just in case. I kept walking, checking the labs and classroom doors as usual. Every door on the left was locked, and the lights were off behind the glass. I could see the city outside, reflections of empty desks lined up in the window. My keys jangled as I walked, and I tried to listen for any more footsteps, but the hall was quiet again. When I reached the end, I peered into the stairwell, but the guy was gone. Maybe he'd gone down to the 3rd floor or slipped out the side exit. There was no reason to worry, but I still looked around for a minute before heading back. I turned down the next hallway, passing a big recycling bin and the vending machines. The hum from the soda machine was louder than usual. A pile of empty cans sat beside it, and the janitor's cart was pushed up against the wall. I made a note to tell the janitor to move it later. The hall was still empty, and the feeling from earlier started to fade. But I kept thinking about how quickly that guy had moved, and how he'd avoided looking at me. I went back toward the classrooms, shining my flashlight into each little window before moving on. I stopped outside classroom 402 and tried the handle. It was unlocked, which was unusual, but sometimes a professor would forget to lock up. I stepped inside, flipping on the lights. The room was cold and still, desks lined in rows, dry erase markers scattered under the whiteboard. I walked between the aisles, scanning for anything out of place. No backpacks, no jackets, nothing. Just the sound of my shoes on the linoleum and the hum from the ceiling vent. At the back of the room, I bent down to look under the last row of desks. Before I could stand up, the same guy from the hallway jumped out from behind the back row. I saw him only for a split second, his face tense and eyes wide, before he rushed straight at me. He had something metal in his hand, looked like a crowbar. I barely had time to react. I ducked, knocking over a chair, and sprinted for the door. He caught up to me just outside the room in the hallway. I felt a sharp, hot pain as he hit my shoulder with the crowbar. The force spun me around and I staggered against the wall, my radio bouncing against my chest. He swung again, aiming for my arm this time, but I blocked it with my elbow. I reached for my radio, thumbs shaking as I pressed the panic button, the only thought in my mind to get help, to keep him from hitting me again. When he heard the radio crackle with my backup's response, he jerked his head up, eyes darting toward the stairwell. Without saying a word, he pushed himself off me and tried to make a run for it. I lunged after him, grabbing his jacket from behind and dragging him down to the floor. The crowbar clattered out of his grip and slid under a row of lockers. We struggled, rolling over each other on the hard tile. He landed a punch to my ribs and I tried to pin his wrists, but he twisted free, desperate and wild. For a few seconds, I thought he might break loose, but then I heard fast footsteps echoing down the hall. My partner, Luis, appeared from the main stairwell, radio in one hand and flashlight in the other. He shouted, "Get down!" and dropped his knee onto the guy's legs, helping me keep him pinned. Michael Williams fought even harder, twisting and kicking, his breath loud and sharp in my ear. We managed to get his arms behind his back just as the campus police burst through the stairwell door. 2 officers came over and handcuffed him while I finally let myself catch my breath. My shoulder throbbed where the crowbar had hit me, and my jacket was torn at the sleeve. The officers asked for a quick rundown, then started searching the guy. They pulled lockpicks from his pocket, a folded-up map from his jeans, and a sheet of paper with a list of room numbers and what looked like serial numbers or inventory codes. The map had 3 offices circled in red pen, and I recognized them as labs with expensive 3D printers and electronics. His student ID card said Michael Williams, but it was faded and cracked at the edge. The officers exchanged a look. One of them said, "He's not supposed to be on campus. He was banned last semester for stealing lab materials." Williams wouldn't look at any of us. He just stared at the floor, breathing heavy. They pulled him up and led him away, and I heard the officer say over his shoulder, "We've been looking for this guy for a while." I sat on the bench for a minute, rubbing my shoulder and watching them haul Williams out of the building. Luis asked if I was okay and handed me my radio. My hand was still shaking from the adrenaline. Down the hall, broken glass from a picture frame glittered on the floor where we'd crashed against the wall. I picked up my logbook, noticed a streak of blood across the cover, and wiped it away with my sleeve. The campus police walked Williams out to their car and started bagging up all the stuff he'd dropped. A detective showed up and took the map, asking if I'd seen Williams in the building before tonight. I told him about the denim jacket and how the guy kept his head down, but I hadn't paid much attention before. They searched the classroom where he'd hidden and found a black backpack with a set of bolt cutters, gloves, and more printouts, inventory sheets and floor plans. It was clear he'd been planning this for a while. Later that night, the officers let me listen in on the first part of the questioning. Williams sat in a small interview room, hands cuffed in front of him, his eyes darting between the detective and the tape recorder. He admitted that he'd been planning to steal computers and lab equipment from the engineering department. He said he'd been coming into the building for almost 2 weeks, figuring out the security schedule and which labs had the most valuable stuff. He'd even watched the janitor's routines so he knew which areas would be empty. Williams told them he'd been expelled about a month before. He was behind on his tuition, flunking out of his classes, and owed thousands in student loans. He'd been desperate. The only way out, he said, was to sell equipment he could grab from the labs. He knew the campus security was light on weeknights, and that most doors were old or easy to pry open. The crowbar was for any locked cabinet he couldn't bypass with the lockpicks. He'd come in that night before 10, slipped into a classroom, and waited. He said he heard me walking the halls earlier, and just stayed quiet in the dark until he thought the coast was clear. He broke down halfway through the interview, shaking and mumbling that he didn't want to hurt anyone. He just needed the money. The detective kept asking about his list, why those rooms, what he planned to take. Williams admitted he'd already sold a few things online, but nothing big. He was hoping to clean out the main electronics lab that night, grab laptops, test equipment, even some of the robotics gear. The detective asked why he attacked me instead of running. Williams didn't answer, just looked down at his hands. The university pressed charges for attempted burglary and assault. The list of equipment he'd targeted was worth more than $50,000, according to the department head. Campus police pulled up security footage from the previous 2 weeks and found him slipping in and out, always late at night, always with a backpack. The administration made a statement about increasing security and reviewing safety procedures. My boss called me in for a debrief and told me they were switching to 2-guard shifts for all evening rounds. They also ordered extra cameras for every hallway on the upper floors and updated the locks on the lab doors. I got a letter from the university president a few days later, along with a certificate and a handshake at a staff meeting. I told him I was just doing my job, but the truth is, I keep replaying that night in my head. It was just luck that I walked into that classroom when I did, luck that my partner was nearby. I think about all the times Williams might have been watching us, taking notes on our routines. Every time I walk those hallways now, I look at every door twice, and every face I see sticks in my mind. Some people get desperate enough to try anything, and you never really know what someone's planning until it's too late. For a long time after, I kept my flashlight in my hand, and my radio clipped right at my shoulder. Even now, when I walk through those empty halls, I always listen for footsteps behind me. Every Friday evening, I ran the same loop through Riverdale, a 4-mile circuit past the park, across the Little Stone Bridge, then down Maple Street and back. I'd been doing that for 3 years now, ever since moving back in with my mom after college. Most people in town kept to the newer neighborhoods, but I liked the old streets, the cracked sidewalks, big sycamores, the quiet. There wasn't much traffic. I could listen to music, nod at the occasional dog walker, and let my mind wander. Every week, my route took me past the old Victorian house on Maple Street, the one that sat empty ever since Mrs. Klein died. Everyone in town knew the place. City workers had nailed plywood over the windows, chained the iron gate, and put a sign in the yard: condemned property, no trespassing. I'd watched the house fall apart over the years. Grass up to my knees, the fence leaning, shingles slipping. It never bothered me. The house was just part of the scenery, another landmark to count off before the halfway mark of my run. That Friday, it was already getting dark when I turned onto Maple. The air was cool and smelled like cut grass, and I was thinking about what to cook for dinner when something caught my eye. The front gate, usually held shut by a heavy padlock, hung open. Weeds bent under muddy footprints on the path. As I slowed down, I saw that the plywood covering the two front windows was pulled away on one side. The glass behind it looked cloudy but not broken. The front door, a heavy old thing with peeling green paint, was half open, drifting in the wind. At first, I thought maybe the city was finally sending someone to check the pipes or start tearing the place down. They'd been talking about it forever. But as I jogged closer, I noticed how the plywood looked. Not removed with a crowbar or a power tool, just yanked at the corner, splintered along the edge. The porch light, dead for years, was still off. There was no work truck or city van parked anywhere. I looked up and down the street. Nobody in sight, no one sitting out on their porch, no cars going by. Something felt wrong. I stopped running, my breath steaming in the air. I slid out my earbuds and tried to listen. The only sound was the wind rattling the porch rail. I stood there for a moment, trying to decide if I should just keep going. It was probably nothing, I thought. Teenagers maybe, or a city guy running late. But I'd never seen the house open like that before. Not once in all these years. My curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the foot of the driveway, glancing up at the dark windows. The yard was a mess. Beer cans in the weeds, a crushed chip bag near the porch. I could see that someone had pushed aside the no trespassing sign and scuffed the dirt. The door swayed on its hinges, bumping gently against the frame. I moved a little closer, just enough to see through the crack. It was darker inside than I expected. The only light came from a couple of moving beams. Flashlights, not work lamps. I heard voices, not just one or two. At least three, low and muffled, talking over each other. Someone laughed, sharp and quick. I ducked behind the porch column and crouched, trying to keep out of sight. As the wind shifted, a sharp, bitter smell drifted out. Weed smoke, unmistakable and thick, mixed with the faint, sour stench of spilled beer. That was the first moment I knew for sure that whoever was inside wasn't working for the city. I stayed low, listening. The voices didn't sound like kids. Too deep, too steady, with that bored edge adults get when they're halfway through a six-pack. I edged up to the porch, boots scraping quietly on the loose boards. Up close, the door hung just a few inches open. I peered through the gap, squinting into the shadows. The flashlight beam swung lazily across the ruined wallpaper and bare floorboards. There, in the middle of the old living room, I saw 4 or 5 people sitting in a ragged circle on the floor. They looked older, late 20s or maybe older, all bundled up in hoodies and jackets, knees drawn up. They were passing something hand to hand, taking turns lighting up, laughing in bursts. One man, his head shaved and face unshaven, leaned back and cracked open another beer. A woman in a gray hoodie poked at a greasy fast food bag on the floor. Empty bottles rolled near the wall, and a pizza box sagged beside them. I counted at least 2 more people tucked in the corner, half hidden by the pile of trash. One stood up suddenly, looking toward the doorway, but didn't move closer. From where I crouched, I could see that the inside was trashed. Spray paint covered the lower half of the walls. A mattress, stained and ripped, lay near the kitchen arch. Somebody had tried to block off the hall with a fallen door. The voices dropped low, almost too quiet to hear, like they were arguing. The light shifted and I caught sight of something that looked like a metal pipe, or maybe a bat, lying near the circle. The smell of weed got stronger. I didn't dare move or make a sound. All I could do was wait, pressed flat against the porch, listening as their voices drifted out into the dark. I stood on the porch, barely breathing, trying to make myself small. The old railing gave a sudden crack beneath my hand, louder than it should have been in the quiet street. Instantly, every voice inside the house stopped. I heard nothing but silence, and then the scrape of shoes on warped floorboards. The flashlight beams disappeared as fast as if someone had snuffed out candles. I froze. For a second, I thought maybe they hadn't noticed. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal. But then I heard the thump of quick footsteps, heavy boots moving straight toward the door. My brain started racing. There was no way to explain myself if they found me crouched there. They'd know I was watching, that I'd seen too much. The door creaked open wider with a slow, deliberate sound, and I saw a tall, broad shadow block the light from inside. I turned and ran without looking back, my shoes slapping against the cracked steps and then the uneven sidewalk. I tried not to think about how close they might be behind me. I passed the dark yards and empty porches, sprinting as hard as I could, past the broken streetlights and trash bins lined up for pickup. My house was 6 blocks away, but every yard felt longer than I remembered. I kept waiting for the sound of feet chasing after me, a voice shouting, a hand grabbing my shoulder. The only sound was my own breath, ragged and loud in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached my own driveway, fumbled the key at the door, and stumbled inside, locking it behind me. I stood in the dark hallway, still listening, but the street outside stayed quiet. That night, I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the empty house, the way the flashlights jerked and the voices dropped silent. I kept replaying the moment the porch gave way, thinking how quickly things changed from curiosity to fear. In the morning, I still felt shaky, but I needed to see for myself if I'd imagined it all, if maybe the house was still open and the group was still inside. So I laced up my shoes and ran the route again, this time in daylight. When I turned onto Maple Street, everything looked like it always did. The house was silent and still, boarded tight from ground to roof. The plywood was nailed flat across the windows, and the door was shut and chained. The sign on the lawn stood up straight. There was no sign anyone had ever been there. No footprints, no beer cans, nothing out of place. Later that morning, I told my dad about what happened. He listened without much surprise. He told me it's common for abandoned houses to draw in people looking for a place to sleep or hang out, especially in a small town where there aren't many places to hide. He said, they probably cleared out fast when they realized someone saw them. Nobody wants the cops poking around. He explained that these groups usually move on quickly, never sticking around once they know they've been spotted. He told me to avoid the house in the future, and if I ever noticed anything suspicious, to call the police instead of checking it out myself. You don't know who's in there or what they're doing. Best not to get involved. He also said I should change up my running route more often, not get too comfortable passing the same places at the same time every week. After that, I stopped running past the old Victorian. I found new streets, doubled back in the middle of my loop, and kept my eyes open. Every time I saw an empty house, I looked twice. Once to check the doors and windows, once to check the street behind me. I started taking my phone and a small flashlight even when I ran in daylight, just in case. I never saw anyone else go in or out of the house on Maple Street. No more shadows behind the boarded windows, no flashlights, no voices drifting into the dark. But every time I passed nearby, I thought about how easily it could have turned out different if I hadn't run, if I decided to confront them or call out. A few months later, I heard the city finally tore down the house after the neighbors kept calling about suspicious activity and trespassers. I jogged past one afternoon and saw nothing but a pile of wood and a bulldozer parked in the dirt. It looked smaller than I remembered, almost harmless. But what bothered me most was the realization of how many times I'd run past that place, week after week, never once thinking about who might be inside or what could be happening just out of sight. I'd gotten used to thinking of my route as safe and familiar. I never expected anything dangerous to be waiting there. Now, whenever I see an abandoned building, I pay more attention. I look for broken locks and open doors, trash in the yard, lights at strange hours. I trust that uneasy feeling when something doesn't look right, and I don't let curiosity push me closer. Even now, I remember how quickly that quiet street turned threatening, how a normal night almost went sideways. I never did find out who those people were, or what they might have done if I hadn't run. But I know for sure I'll never let my guard down around a place just because it looks empty. Sometimes, the most ordinary-looking spots are the ones hiding the worst trouble. Now I always check twice, listen harder, and trust my gut when the hairs on my neck stand up. That's something I won't forget, no matter how familiar the street might seem. When I was 23, I took a job working night shifts at a 24-hour coffee shop on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to get me through college, and most nights passed by quietly. Usually, it was just me behind the counter from 10 p.m. to close, with my coworker Lisa covering the early night and heading home an hour before we locked up. That night started like any other. I wiped down tables, refilled the napkin dispensers, and made myself a black coffee to get through the shift. We didn't get much foot traffic at that hour, only a handful of regulars, truckers, insomniac students, a nurse from the nearby urgent care who always took her coffee black with 3 sugars. By 11, the place was nearly empty, except for one old guy reading a paperback at the window and a teenager hunched over his phone. The bell over the door chimed now and then, but it was never more than a minute or two of small talk and an order to go. I kept glancing at the clock, thinking about my essay due in the morning. The air outside was thick and humid, even with the AC running, and every time I opened the door to take the trash out, it felt like stepping into a wet sponge. It must have been close to midnight when the guy came in. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing a faded baseball cap, brown work jacket, and jeans that were just a little too clean. There wasn't anything remarkable about him at first. He stood in the entrance for a few seconds, blinking at the overhead lights. When he walked up to the counter, I noticed how stiff his movements were, like he was forcing himself not to limp. He didn't look at the menu or even glance at the pastry case. Instead, he stared right at me. "What time do you close?" he asked. I told him we closed at 1 in the morning, even though there was a sign right above my head that said the same thing. He just nodded and kept staring at me, not saying another word. He didn't order, didn't look around, just nodded once more, almost slow enough to seem deliberate. For some reason, it made the hairs on my arms stand up. He turned and walked out, the bell over the door jangling behind him. I tried to laugh it off and told myself it was nothing, but I watched him cross the parking lot and disappear behind a row of hedges, moving slow but steady, like he'd walked that route 100 times. After that, I tried to focus on closing duties. The floor needed mopping, the sugar dispensers had to be refilled, and I wanted to get the trash out before Lisa left. But every time I turned around, I felt like someone was watching me through the glass, even though the parking lot was empty except for a rusty minivan and an old pickup truck. I busied myself with the register, stacking cups and making sure the pastries were covered, but I kept checking the reflection in the window. There was nothing there but my own tired face and the fluorescent glare. The last customers filtered out a little before closing. Lisa started wiping down the espresso machine and humming along to some pop song playing faintly on the radio. She was always good at pretending she wasn't bothered by anything, but that night she kept glancing at the door too. We didn't say much, just finished our routine. When it was time for her to leave, she tossed her bag over her shoulder and waved, saying, "See you tomorrow." I watched her taillights fade down the road before turning the deadbolt and flipping the sign to closed. After that, the silence settled in. It was almost peaceful, The kind of quiet you only get in the middle of the night, interrupted by the distant rumble of a passing car or the hum of the soda fridge. I counted the register, writing down the totals on a slip of paper and dropping the bills into the safe. The routine made me feel grounded. I checked the bathrooms, switched off the lights in the back, and set the timer on the coffee machine for the morning shift. There was nothing left to do but lock up and go home. I had just started pulling on my jacket when I heard the bell above the door again. It was exactly 1 a.m. For a split second, I thought maybe Lisa had forgotten something, but when I looked up, I saw it was the same man from before. This time, he didn't pause at the door or look around. He walked straight for the counter, shoulders squared, face set in a hard line. There was something about the way he moved that felt different, less uncertain, more deliberate. His eyes stayed locked on me the whole time, not blinking. "We're closed," I told him, my voice louder than I meant it to be. He ignored me completely. He kept coming, his footsteps heavy on the old linoleum, like he knew exactly where he was going. I stepped back as he reached the counter, my hand still holding the keys. He was close enough now that I could see the sweat on his forehead and the rough stubble on his jaw. There was no sign of confusion or hesitation in his face anymore. He leaned in, putting his hands on the counter, and just stared at me. The way he looked at me made my skin crawl, like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. I tried to think of what to do. Should I yell? Call someone? Run out the back? The register was already locked, my bag behind the counter. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the menu or around the room. He just kept staring, like he was waiting for me to make the next move. I took another step back, putting more distance between us, and tried to keep my voice steady. "We're closed. You need to leave." He didn't budge. He glanced at the door, then back at me, his jaw working as if he was grinding his teeth. I heard the faint click of the cooler kicking on in the back, but it sounded much too loud in the silence. The man finally shifted his weight, his eyes never leaving mine, and leaned even further over the counter. Without saying a word, the man swung one leg over the counter and climbed into the work area behind the bar. He moved with an odd calmness, like he had done this before or had thought about it for a long time. I shouted, "Get out! You need to leave right now!" But my voice just bounced off the walls and didn't slow him down. He ignored me completely. My heart was thumping in my ears and I grabbed the edge of the counter, backing away as he kept coming forward, closing the distance between us. He stepped over the loose mat on the floor, knocking over a stack of clean mugs as he came toward me. I could see his hands were clenched into fists. There was no confusion or hesitation anymore, just a fixed purpose in his eyes. The space behind the counter was tight, so I ducked around the espresso machine and slid toward the opening at the far end, putting a few feet between us. He watched every move, eyes locked on me, but he didn't speed up or slow down. He just kept coming. I made a split-second decision and sprinted for the back room. My shoes squeaked on the tile as I ran, and I could hear him moving behind me, bumping into things and cursing under his breath. I reached the storage room and slammed the door, twisting the deadbolt until it clicked. For a second, everything went silent except for my own shaky breathing. Then his footsteps pounded up to the other side of the door. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, barely able to unlock the screen. My training from orientation came back to me in bits and pieces, but I still struggled to think straight. The first blow rattled the door hard. I dropped to my knees and tried to dial the security company, keeping my voice low as I pressed the phone to my ear. His fist, or maybe his shoulder, crashed into the door again, and this time it sounded like the hinges might give. I tried to sound calm, telling the security operator, "There's a man inside the store. He's trying to break into the back room." The operator asked me to stay put and said someone would be there soon. That seemed to set the man off even more. He started shouting, his voice rough and angry, demanding that I open the door. The words didn't make any sense, just fragments, but the meaning was clear. He was determined to get in. I scooted back until my shoulders pressed against the shelves stacked with boxes of coffee filters and napkins. My fingers shook as I switched over to call 911. I whispered into the phone, barely loud enough to be heard, while the operator asked questions and told me to stay safe. From inside the storage room, I could hear him throwing things against the door. Every few seconds there was a crash of glass or the sound of metal hitting the floor. He must have been grabbing whatever he could find on the counters and flinging it at the door to try to scare me out. One heavy object made a loud, dull thud, and then I heard more glass break, probably mugs or the syrup bottles. I tried not to make any noise, barely even breathing as I listened to him pace around, sometimes muttering to himself, sometimes yelling directly at the door. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking if I could still hear him, if I was safe. I told her yes, but the truth was, I had no idea if the door would actually hold. Every few minutes the banging would stop, and I would hope maybe he'd left. But then it would start again, harder and more desperate, like he was working himself into a frenzy. I could hear drawers opening and slamming, more things crashing to the ground. Sometimes I heard his feet pounding across the front area, circling the building, probably looking for another way in. I stayed curled up in the corner, clutching my phone and waiting for someone to arrive. 20 minutes passed like hours. I lost track of time. I couldn't see anything except the red glow of the emergency exit sign above the door. My whole body ached from tensing up, but I was too scared to move or even stand up. The sounds from outside changed as time went on. Less yelling, more heavy footsteps, the scrape of something metal on the tiles. I pressed my ear to the door, listening for any clue of what he was doing. At one point, I heard a chair dragging across the floor and another burst of breaking glass. Finally, there was a long stretch of silence. I listened hard, afraid he was waiting right outside. The dispatcher said, "Police are on the way. Security is pulling in now. Just stay on the line." My phone was slippery in my hand from sweat. I stayed still, afraid to even breathe loudly. A few minutes later, I heard voices outside the building. More than one, louder and sharper than before. There was a distant shout, then the sound of running feet on the pavement. I didn't hear the man anymore, just the voices of people calling out commands. After a few tense moments, someone banged on the outside of the back room door, announcing they were security. I unlocked it slowly, and when I opened it, the storage room was filled with the harsh glare of flashlights and two men in uniforms. One of them put a hand up and told me to stay where I was, then guided me out toward the parking lot. Outside, the police were already talking to the man. They'd found him wandering behind the coffee shop, stumbling in the alley with blood on his hands and a wild look on his face. He didn't fight or try to run. He just kept saying something about needing to talk to me. The police handcuffed him and put him in the back of the cruiser. I stood shivering in the warm night air while one of the officers asked me what happened, and I gave my statement as best I could. My legs felt numb, like I had run a marathon. When my manager arrived, she walked through the shop, her hand over her mouth as she saw the wreckage. Broken mugs, shattered glass, overturned chairs. Even the espresso machine had been pulled halfway off the counter. It looked like a tornado had hit the place. The police took photos and asked more questions, making notes as I described the man and what he'd done. It all felt unreal, like it had happened to someone else. After everything was over, I quit that job the next week. My nerves couldn't handle another night shift, not after seeing how quickly a normal night could turn into something dangerous. I found work on the day shift at another cafe across town, somewhere with big windows and lots of customers during daylight hours. That night taught me to pay more attention to the small details, The way someone watches, the way they move, the moments when everything seems just a little too quiet. I never worked alone at night again after that. When I moved to Milwaukee in January 2024, everything felt fresh and promising. I'd landed my first real job out of grad school, working as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm that took up the better part of a tower downtown. Wanting to keep things easy, I chose an apartment in one of those new glass and steel complexes that line the river near the business district. The lobby looked like something out of a hotel, all pale tile and chrome fixtures, and you needed a fob just to use the elevator. The ad on Zillow promised quiet professionals and vibrant city living. The rent was steep, but my company covered the first month, and my parents helped with the deposit. At first, I thought I got lucky. The walls seemed thick. The view from my 8th floor window showed the whole city. And even at night, you could hear nothing except a distant hum of traffic or someone closing a door down the hall. For the first month, I didn't meet many people. Most tenants kept to themselves, but you'd pass the same folks in the gym, laundry, or lobby. There was a young couple with a baby in 803, and a woman who left early every morning in running gear. My own place was a one-bedroom, all white paint and big windows, with a small balcony looking west. I got used to the rhythms of city life. Groceries at Metro Market, grabbing coffee downstairs, the squeak of my neighbor's shoes on the hall carpet in the mornings. At night, I'd watch TV or catch up on work, and nothing much felt out of the ordinary. For a while, I felt completely at ease. Then, in early February, things changed. Frank moved into the unit next to mine on a Thursday. I noticed him right away because he was older than most tenants, about 50, tall, balding, with deep lines around his mouth and a patchy beard. The movers came late in the afternoon. I watched them unload a faded couch, old boxes, a TV, and a cooler with masking tape on the lid. Frank stood in the doorway with a paper bag from the liquor store, telling the movers where to put things in a slurred voice. He barely looked at me when I nodded hello. That night, around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of someone yelling through the wall. At first, I thought it was the TV, but then I heard Frank cursing on the phone, loud enough for his words to echo into my bedroom. "You think you're smarter than me? I know what's going on. Don't play with me," he shouted. The conversation ended with a loud crash and the sound of a can rolling on tile. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe he just needed time to settle in. The next day, he left empty bottles outside his door, lined up along the hallway carpet. When I took out my trash that weekend, Frank was standing barefoot in the hallway, talking on the phone, his voice tense and angry. "I told you don't call here again. I know who you are," he said, glancing at me but not acknowledging my presence. The hallway reeked of cheap beer. Other tenants passed by, not saying anything, just moving a little quicker than usual. I thought about reporting it, but the leasing office already had a reputation for not caring. The manager, a guy named Mark, only showed up on Wednesdays, and the assistant barely left the office. My emails about noise went unanswered. By Valentine's Day, the building felt different. Frank's unit always had its blinds closed, and the faint blue light from his TV glowed through the cracks. Sometimes I'd hear his phone ring after midnight, followed by more shouting or muffled crashes. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Maybe he'd calm down after a while. For a week, things stayed the same. Frank yelling at his phone, bottles piling up, the rest of us pretending not to hear. Then, in the last week of February, things got worse. It started with the trash. I opened my door one morning to find a greasy takeout bag and an empty beer can lying just outside my welcome mat. Down the hall, There were wrappers and a half-eaten sandwich near the elevator. I cleaned it up, thinking it must have been an accident. But the next morning, more trash appeared. I saw Frank standing in his doorway, eyeing the hallway. He muttered something when he saw me, but I couldn't make it out. I started keeping my door locked at all times, even when I was home. Frank's paranoia escalated. Every morning, I noticed strips of clear tape across his door frame, sometimes 2 or 3 layers, with the edges pressed flat like he'd measured them with a ruler. At first, I thought maybe he was repairing something, but then I saw him inspecting the tape, running his finger along the edges and frowning. Once, as I was heading out for work, he stopped me. "You see anyone near my door? Somebody's been messing with it. I know they're trying to get in," he said, his breath heavy with alcohol. I shook my head and hurried past, pretending I was late for a meeting. That day, I emailed the property manager again, describing the trash and the tape, but I got only an automated reply. Other tenants started noticing too. The woman from 803 told me she found a broken beer bottle outside her door. The couple with the baby stopped using the laundry room on our floor and started going downstairs instead. No one wanted to confront Frank directly, not after he screamed at the guy from 807 for spying through the peephole. Frank seemed to be awake at all hours. Some nights, I'd hear him pacing his unit, talking to himself, slamming drawers and cupboards. If anyone so much as walked past his door, he'd yank it open and glare at them, muttering threats under his breath. The paranoia didn't let up. One afternoon, I came home to find Frank arguing with a woman from the cleaning staff. He was accusing her of stealing his mail and planting bugs in his apartment. She tried to back away, but he blocked the hallway, waving his phone in her face and threatening to call the police. I heard him shout, "Don't think you can fool me. I know what you're doing," before she slipped past him and hurried down the stairs. I stood at the end of the hall, pretending to check my phone. By early March, the atmosphere on our floor had changed. People avoided eye contact in the hallway. If you saw Frank coming, you stepped back into your apartment or waited for the elevator instead of taking the stairs. At least twice a week, he would leave bags of trash near other people's doors, and sometimes he'd bang on the walls late at night, demanding to know who was watching him. The tape on his door was replaced daily. If it was broken, he'd storm up and down the hall, looking for someone to accuse. No matter how many complaints went to the property manager, nothing changed. Mark just shrugged when I confronted him, saying, "If he pays rent on time, there's not much we can do." That answer made me uneasy, but it was clear the management didn't want trouble. Frank's episodes got louder and more unpredictable. Sometimes he'd scream for hours. Sometimes he'd stand in the hall staring at the doors, gripping his phone tight like it was a weapon. Eventually, most of the tenants on my floor stopped using the main hallway altogether, finding excuses to take the elevator from other floors or avoid the entire area after dark. The week in Denver felt like a break I'd been needing for months. Corporate put us up at a business hotel not far from the airport, and between endless PowerPoints and awkward icebreakers, I found it surprisingly easy to forget about the mess back in Milwaukee. My phone barely buzzed the first few days. No noise complaints, no hallway drama, no strange encounters in the elevator. I even started to hope maybe Frank had gotten the message or finally decided to lay low. It was cold and snowing in Denver, but the air in my hotel room felt easier to breathe than my own apartment ever had. By Wednesday, the training routine was starting to blur together. Early breakfast, lectures about ethics, group projects on Excel spreadsheets. That night, after dinner with some colleagues, I went back to my room and caught up on emails. At around 10 p.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed my downstairs neighbor Kevin, someone I'd barely spoken to outside of quick greetings in the mailroom. His voice was tense and fast. something's happening upstairs. It's bad, he said. In the background, I could hear distant shouting and glass breaking. Frank's losing it. He's breaking stuff, screaming. It sounds like he's destroying his whole place. Kevin said the noise had started early in the evening, loud enough to rattle his ceiling. At first, people thought maybe there was construction after hours, but then the sound of smashing glass and thuds grew worse. He said he went into the hallway and saw other neighbors standing by their doors, listening, not sure what to do. The building had never felt safe, but this was the first time people actually looked scared. By the time Kevin called me, he'd already seen the police pull up outside. There's like 6 squad cars, and the fire alarm just went off. People are leaving the building. He promised to keep me updated, but the call ended abruptly when he said, "Hold on, something else is happening." I barely slept that night, waiting for more messages. I kept checking the building's resident portal, but the only update was a bland notice about an emergency maintenance situation. In the morning, Kevin texted that he'd been allowed back inside, but police and fire crews were everywhere. Frank's apartment, he wrote, looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The property manager, as usual, was nowhere to be seen. Later that day, I heard the rest of the story from other tenants. Frank's breakdown started with yelling and the sound of objects being hurled against walls. By the time anyone realized how bad it was, he was throwing entire pieces of furniture off his third-floor balcony. Chairs, a lamp, even a TV, crashed down onto the parked cars below. Windows shattered and glass rained onto the sidewalk. People on the street ran for cover, and someone called 911 when a heavy dresser landed on the hood of a minivan. When police arrived, Frank refused to answer the door. He screamed at officers through the door, claiming people were out to get him and accusing everyone in the building of spying. When they tried to force entry, he stacked furniture against the door and threatened to set the place on fire. Someone pulled the fire alarm, and the whole floor was evacuated. Crisis negotiators were called in, trying to talk Frank down as he paced inside, still screaming, threatening to light something on fire if anyone came closer. The standoff dragged on for hours. Residents huddled in the lobby or out in the cold, watching the drama play out through the glass doors. Finally, around midnight, Frank gave up. He let the negotiators in, collapsed to his knees, and was handcuffed without a fight. Paramedics came up with a stretcher, and neighbors watched as he was taken out, eyes wild and darting, muttering to himself. The police spent the rest of the night in the hallway, taking statements and securing the scene. The building was eerily quiet, except for the distant sound of sirens. Management taped off Frank's door, and word spread that he'd been taken straight to a psychiatric facility. Doctors later said he'd been suffering from acute psychosis, probably triggered by alcohol withdrawal and months of paranoia. By sunrise, the building management sent out another vague email about a resident disturbance, promising to address the situation. Frank's lease was terminated on the spot. No one protested. I flew back to Milwaukee the next Monday, dreading what I'd find. The lobby was crowded with people talking in hushed voices. As I stepped onto my floor, I saw yellow police tape still draped across Frank's old door. The hallway stank of stale smoke and chemicals, and broken glass crunched under my shoes. 2 windows at the end of the hall were boarded up with sheets of plywood. My welcome mat was covered in dust and bits of drywall. Kevin met me by the elevators and filled in the last details. The building was still cleaning up the damage. 2 cars in the parking lot were totaled, and a section of the third-floor balcony railing was mangled where Frank had shoved furniture over the edge. The property company for once took action, installing new cameras, reinforcing the doors, and announcing stricter tenant screening for new move-ins. Some neighbors were already packing up to leave. The couple with the baby had broken their lease and were looking for a house in the suburbs. I walked past Frank's door one last time, the tape fluttering in the draft. His name was still on the mailbox downstairs, but the apartment was empty except for broken blinds and scorch marks on the ceiling. That night, lying in bed, I realized just how close I'd come to being in the middle of something dangerous. I'd spent months worrying about noise, trash, and hallway arguments, but it could have been a lot worse if I hadn't been gone that week. Since then, I've paid a lot more attention to who my neighbors are and how management handles complaints. There's only so much you can do about people like Frank, but you can be careful about where you choose to live and who you trust to keep things safe. Some threats don't come from strangers. They're right on the other side of your wall. Most nights at the Palms Motel felt the same after a while. The sign outside buzzed and flickered, always missing half the letters, and the salt air from the ocean made everything feel damp, even inside. I'd started there back in December, right after the last guy quit because of a fight in the parking lot. It wasn't hard work, but it wore you down. At first, I thought maybe I'd get used to the weirdos, but you don't really get used to anything at the Palms. I kept telling myself I'd only do this until I found something better. The pay was okay, and I could keep to myself on the slow nights. That was enough for now. The lobby was a rectangle with faded green carpet and 2 cheap armchairs. There was a big, scratched-up front desk that separated me from the guests, not that it did much good. On the wall behind me hung a yellowed certificate that said, Excellence in Customer Service 2008. Nobody looked at it, not even me. I sat there every night with my little radio on, waiting for something stupid to happen. Half the time, people paid cash and didn't give a real name. The other half, it was regulars who always looked like they wanted to be invisible. Some nights, I recognized faces from the local mugshot page online. I didn't ask questions. On that Thursday night in March, the wind was loud enough to rattle the lobby door every few minutes. It made a high whistling sound, like something leaking. Around 10:30, I finished my sandwich from the vending machine and tried not to think about the strange sticky patch behind the counter that never really went away no matter how much bleach I used. I was scrolling through my phone, half watching a rerun on the old TV. There was only one other car in the lot besides mine. Room 12. Guy checked in with a Florida ID that looked fake. He smelled like gasoline and kept looking out the window, but he paid for 2 nights and didn't want housekeeping. I always kept the office door locked after 10 p.m., not that the lock worked right. The owner, Mr. Patel, said not to bother him unless there was blood or police. That's how he put it. He never replaced any of the lights outside, and most of the security cameras just blinked a red light and recorded nothing. No trouble, he always said. Don't get involved. I learned to keep my head down and keep the baseball bat under the desk. Kevin would come by most weeks, usually after his shift ended at the shop next door. He was one of the only people I actually talked to. I think he felt bad for me, or maybe he just liked the free coffee. He was about my age, big guy, always with grease under his nails and a tired look on his face. His laugh was too loud for a place like this, but it made the nights go faster. We had an arrangement. He'd bring food, and I'd let him in through the side door so Mr. Patel didn't know I had company. It wasn't against the rules, but I didn't need more trouble. That night, Kevin texted me around 10 to say he was on his way. I said sure, bring fries this time. He showed up just before 11, the bottom of his coveralls streaked with oil and his hair still wet from washing up. He had a paper bag in his hand, and that dumb grin like he'd just won the lottery. Man, it smells worse in here every time, he said, setting the food on the counter. I told him it was probably the mildew or maybe the guy in room 5 smoking something he shouldn't. We both laughed. I poured him some coffee and locked the door again behind him. We ate on the cheap chairs in the lobby, our knees bumping the wobbly little table. The burgers were cold, but the fries were still crispy. Kevin told me about some guy who tried to pay for his oil change with loose change and a handful of scratch-off tickets. He had a way of telling stories that made everything sound like the world's dumbest sitcom. I found myself relaxing a little, forgetting about the broken camera in the hallway or the creepy stains in room 7. Outside, the wind made the sign creak, and something kept banging against the dumpster. "Probably just a raccoon," Kevin said. I shrugged and watched the empty parking lot through the fogged-up window. After a while, I remembered I had to get the bank deposit ready for the owner. There was a metal safe bolted to the floor in the manager's office, just past the back hallway. Mr. Patel kept the combination written on a piece of tape under the desk drawer, like that was some big security measure. I told Kevin I'd be right back. He was messing with the TV remote, grumbling about the volume. I went behind the desk, through the narrow hallway, and into the manager's office. The walls were covered with old paperwork, most of it curling up from the moisture. The safe was ugly, chipped gray paint, and always smelled faintly of mold when I opened it. I crouched down and started spinning the dial. My hands smelled like fryer grease from the fries. I could still hear Kevin laughing about something on TV. Right then, I heard the front door slam open so hard it hit the wall. I froze, half standing, the safe door still open in front of me. For a second, I thought it was just the wind again. But then heavy footsteps echoed through the lobby, loud and fast. I turned to look out the small office window that faced the lobby. That's when I saw them, 2 men, both in dark clothes, faces covered by ski masks. They moved quick, not looking around, straight for Kevin. Before I could even yell, the first one raised a metal pipe and brought it down hard on Kevin's head. The sound was sharp, like hitting wet wood. Kevin dropped to his knees, his hands barely coming up to shield himself. The second guy kicked him in the side, and Kevin fell forward, face first onto the stained lobby carpet. I saw blood start to spread from under his head almost right away. The 2 men moved fast and quiet, not saying a word, just glancing once toward the office door where I was standing, still half crouched behind the safe, heart pounding in my throat. I didn't move, barely breathed, watching the blood crawl out in a dark puddle from beneath Kevin's face as he lay motionless on the floor. I grabbed the edge of the desk, trying to pull myself up, but my hands were shaking. My first thought was the phone. I needed to call for help, but when I reached for it, one of the masked men caught sight of me through the narrow window into the office. He locked eyes with me, then moved so fast the door nearly came off its hinges. He was on me before I could say a word, swinging the same metal pipe he'd just used on Kevin. The first hit caught the side of my head, blinding white pain exploding across my vision. I went down to my knees. I tried to shield my face, but the next blow sent me sprawling against the safe. The pain was everywhere, a dull throb mixed with sharp jabs in my skull and face. Blood was running down over my eyes, into my mouth. The second man shoved his way into the office and started yelling, demanding the money. "Open the safe! Now! Now!" I couldn't see straight. I fumbled for the dial, barely able to twist it with shaking, slippery fingers. The world kept going black at the edges, sounds muffled and distant. I thought if I passed out, they'd kill me right there. One of them grabbed my shirt, pulled me up, and slammed my head against the safe. I tasted blood and metal. I managed to get the safe open, but as soon as they saw the stacks of cash, they started ripping through the drawers, knocking everything onto the dirty floor. The bigger one kept glancing at me, pipe in hand. His breathing was fast and ragged. The other shoved bills into his pockets, cursing under his breath, looking for more. I just sat there, knees drawn up, my back against the cold metal of the safe, blinking through the blood and sweat. I heard Kevin moaning from the lobby, the sound barely reaching me. Then, out of nowhere, the distant howl of sirens cut through everything. The two men froze. They looked at each other, panic in their eyes behind the holes in their ski masks. "Cops! Let's go!" one hissed. They turned, bolting through the side office door that led to the back alley. I tried to push myself up, but my legs wouldn't work. I heard more sirens, louder this time, tires squealing on the wet street outside. Somewhere in the confusion, Kevin managed to get to his feet. I heard the lobby door bang open, and a moment later, the faint clang of the payphone receiver. He was slumped against the wall, blood streaming from his head, trying to talk to 911. His words came out slurred, but he gave our address, gasping for breath. I saw flashes of red and blue through the office window as the first patrol car pulled up. Paramedics rushed in a few minutes later. I couldn't move. Someone kept asking me questions, but I couldn't get the words out. They rolled me onto my back, strapped me to a stretcher, and carried me out through the lobby. I caught a glimpse of Kevin, eyes open, hands clutching his stomach. He looked up and nodded at me, just once, as they wheeled him toward a second ambulance. At the hospital, everything felt slow and numb. The fluorescent light stung my eyes. I could hear doctors talking about concussions and head trauma. Someone stitching up my scalp while a nurse wiped the blood away. I drifted in and out. I heard someone say, 7 stitches. Keep him awake for now. My shirt was soaked, sticking to my skin, blood dried in patches down my arms and neck. The next morning, a police officer came to my room. He said the cameras had captured everything, both attackers, their masks slipping as they looked up at the dome camera above the front door. Their names were Ray Miller and Tony Rodriguez, faces known to every cop in town, small-time dealers and thieves with a string of drug charges. The police had already started searching for them, checking the local drug houses and squatters' camps near the docks. I gave my statement, trying to remember every detail, what they said, how they moved, how Kevin tried to fight back. I couldn't get the sound of the pipe hitting his head out of my mind. 3 days later, the detectives found them holed up in an abandoned house 10 miles from the motel. They had cash from the safe, plus a pile of stolen credit cards and enough heroin to keep them out of their minds for a week. The arrest made the local paper. The headline read, "Armed robbers captured after brutal motel attack." The article had a photo of the Palms Motel sign, still missing half its letters. Kevin was released from the hospital a day before me. He was walking, but slowly, and sometimes he'd just stop and touch the back of his head like he couldn't believe what happened. He said the headaches were bad, worse at night. He tried to joke about it, but there was something different in his eyes, like he was watching for danger everywhere now. I took a month off after I got out. The stitches came out, but the headaches stayed for a while. I didn't go back to the motel right away. Mr. Patel called, asking when I'd return, telling me he'd put in new cameras and a better lock on the office door. He said he was hiring an armed security guard for night shifts. No more working alone. I thought about quitting for good, finding a job that didn't leave me staring at the door every time I heard footsteps after dark. They told me later the two men had watched the motel for weeks, figuring out the schedule, the quietest hours, even the routes the police cars took at night. They waited until they saw Kevin come in, knowing there'd be more cash in the safe after a busy Thursday. It wasn't random. They waited for their chance, desperate and angry enough to do anything. That's what sticks with me most. After that night, nothing at the Palms ever felt safe again. Even now, when I walk into any quiet building at night, I check every lock twice and always look for the cameras first. I learned that there are people out there who watch, who wait, and who will do anything for what they want. If you work alone in a place nobody cares about, you're an easy target for people who've stopped caring about anything except their next fix. That lesson stays with me, long after the bruises and stitches are gone. When I was 18, my parents left me alone in our old Victorian house while they went on a business trip to Chicago. The place had been in our family for a while, and I knew every creak and draft in that house. The rooms were big, ceilings high, floors old hardwood that echoed your steps at night. It was normal for me to stay alone sometimes, and honestly, I liked it. My friends always said my house was creepy, but to me, it was just home. There was a big backyard, a detached garage, and the basement was one of those half-finished types. Part laundry room, part storage for boxes of stuff my mom couldn't throw away. My parents left that morning, and by late afternoon I had already settled in, made myself a frozen pizza, and planned to do nothing for the next couple days but watch movies and sleep in. It felt like the perfect lazy weekend. That first night I was stretched out on the old brown couch in the living room, a blanket wrapped around me, TV on loud, the house dark except for the glow of the screen. I picked some horror movie, not because I liked being scared, but because it made the time pass. Outside the wind picked up, and sometimes you could hear it whistle through the gaps in the old windows. I barely noticed. I'd lived with these sounds for years. Then, about halfway through my movie, I heard a loud thud from the basement. It wasn't like the small creaks and groans you hear from pipes or the furnace. This was a real, heavy noise, almost like someone dropped a box or knocked over a chair. I muted the TV and sat up, listening. At first, it was silent again. I waited, eyes glued to the doorway that led toward the stairs, but there wasn't anything else. No footsteps, no voices, just the regular settling noises of the house. I tried to tell myself it was the wind. Maybe something in the storage room was balanced funny and just fell over. The basement door was always closed and I could see it from where I sat. It was still shut. I didn't really want to go down there, but at the same time, I didn't like not knowing. I waited a little longer, but nothing happened, so I finally pressed play and tried to forget about it. But I kept thinking about the noise, and every now and then I would turn the sound down and listen hard, just to be sure. I didn't hear anything else, and after a while I convinced myself it was just one of those things that happen in old houses. Still, I found myself locking the front door even though we lived in a safe neighborhood. The hours passed. I finished my movie, scrolled on my phone for a bit, and then went around the house turning off lights. I brushed my teeth and looked out the window at the backyard, saw nothing but dark trees and the swing swaying in the wind. When I went to bed, I left the hallway light on, just in case I needed to get up in the night. That's not something I usually did. The next morning, the house was quiet. I slept late, got up, and made myself some toast. I avoided thinking about the basement until I walked past the basement door and saw a faint line of dust on the floor, like it had shifted a bit. I tried to ignore it, but every time I walked by, I kept looking at that door, and every now and then I would remember that sound from the night before. It was just so loud and out of place. By the afternoon, I had convinced myself I should check it out, mostly just to get it out of my head. My parents always said to leave things alone if nothing seemed wrong, but if something was broken down there, I'd get blamed for it later. So, I decided I had to look. I grabbed my phone and headed down the narrow wooden steps into the basement. Only one light worked down there, a yellow bulb that cast weird shadows behind the shelves. The air was musty, smelled like old cardboard and laundry detergent. I pulled the cord for the light, and the bulb flickered before settling into a dim glow. The storage area was full of boxes, old Christmas decorations, bags of summer clothes, some tools and paint cans stacked on metal shelves. At first, everything looked the same as always, but then I noticed that some of the boxes on the far side of the room had been moved. They were stacked neat against the wall before, but now two were angled out, and one was tipped over. Ornaments had rolled across the concrete, and a few of the glass ones were broken, glitter and shards scattered everywhere. I crouched down, picking up some of the pieces, trying to remember if the boxes had always been like this. I set the broken ornaments aside and started putting the rest back in the box. My hands shook a little, but I kept telling myself it must have just been from the wind rattling the basement windows. Or maybe I'd stacked the boxes wrong last Christmas. As I was cleaning up, I heard something above me. Slow, steady footsteps, creaking across the floorboards of the living room right above my head. Someone was walking around upstairs, their steps heavy and deliberate, moving back and forth in the same area I had been in the night before. I stopped moving, my hands still in the box, listening. The footsteps kept going, not fast, but steady, shifting from one side of the room to the other. It wasn't the sound of the house settling. It was too clear, too much like a person moving. I could hear the slight drag of weight with each step. My stomach dropped. I hadn't left the TV on, and I knew for sure I had locked the front door. There was no car in the driveway but mine. I waited, barely breathing, as the steps paused right above me, then started again, heading toward the kitchen. I stayed perfectly still, crouched behind the storage shelves, and listened as whoever it was moved slowly through my house. Panic set in when I understood that a stranger was inside our home. I couldn't think clearly, my ears straining to catch every noise from above. The only way out of the basement led straight to the hallway, and that's exactly where the person was walking around. The house was old, and every step they took made the wood creak loudly, sending little vibrations through the ceiling. I crouched down even lower behind the furnace, cold concrete pressing through my jeans. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped my phone. I tried to call for help, but as soon as I pressed the emergency number, the screen just spun and spun. No bars, not even one. Down in that basement, the signal was always bad, but now it felt like a cruel joke. I kept listening. It sounded like they were moving from room to room, opening doors, pushing something heavy, maybe looking for cash or jewelry. Then the footsteps paused, and I heard the familiar metallic sound of the basement door handle being turned. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed myself against the furnace, hiding in the darkest spot I could find. The door creaked open with a sound that seemed to echo forever. I could hear the intruder's weight on the first step, then another step, slow and careful, like he was listening for any noise. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he would hear it. I gripped my phone tight and tried not to move, tried not to even breathe. The basement door opened all the way, and the footsteps started coming down. I could see the shadow of his legs stretching across the concrete floor, the light from upstairs making everything look twisted and strange. I waited as long as I could. Each step he took was slow, careful, deliberate. He was about halfway down when I realized that if I didn't move now, he would see me any second. Without thinking anymore, I jumped out from behind the furnace and sprinted toward the stairs. I screamed as loud as I could, a raw sound that tore at my throat. My feet pounded up the steps, echoing the sound of my own panic. The man on the stairs froze, startled by my sudden screaming. He turned, caught a glimpse of me, and then bolted back up into the kitchen. I barely even looked at him, just ran straight through, dodging to the side as he crashed past the kitchen table. He didn't try to stop me. He just ran for the back door, flung it open, and disappeared out into the yard. I didn't stop running. I kept going until I got to the bathroom, slammed the door, and locked it behind me. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the lock 3 times before I got it shut. I sat on the cold tile floor, back against the tub, and finally saw the little bars light up on my phone. This time, the call went through. I told the 911 operator what happened, my words tumbling over each other, and she said the police were on their way. It felt like hours waiting in that bathroom, but later, I found out it was less than 10 minutes before the squad cars pulled into the driveway. The officers went room to room, their heavy boots thudding on the floors, voices sharp and serious. They checked the backyard, the basement, the garage, every closet and cupboard, but the man was already long gone. One of the detectives talked to me in the living room while the others dusted for fingerprints and took pictures of the door. They found pry marks on the back door's frame where he had forced it open. They said it looked like someone had been watching the house for a while, waiting for the right time. My parents' car was gone, the curtains were open, and the mailbox was empty. The perfect signal for someone looking to break in. I showed them the boxes in the basement, the knocked-over ornaments, all the little things I had noticed but ignored. The detective said the man was probably in the house for at least an hour before I heard him. He had likely gone through the bedrooms and checked drawers for valuables before he started searching downstairs. My parents came home the next day, their business trip cut short by my call. They barely said anything when they walked through the door, just hugged me tight. We had a security company at the house before noon, installing new locks and cameras on every door and window. For a few days, it felt like every sound was a threat. I couldn't walk past the basement door without checking twice that it was locked. Even after things calmed down, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My parents talked to the neighbors and started a group chat for the block, everyone promising to keep an eye out for strangers or cars parked too long. I slept with my door locked and my phone next to my pillow. The detective called once more to say they were still investigating, but they didn't think they'd catch the guy unless he tried something like this again. After that night, I never stayed alone in the house again. If my parents needed to travel, I stayed with a friend or a relative, and if I ever had to go in the basement, I left the door open and kept my phone in my hand. The whole experience taught me how vulnerable you really are when you think you're safe, especially in a big old house where nobody can hear you scream. I learned to pay attention to the small things, a window left unlocked, a box out of place, a sound that doesn't belong. I never felt the same in that house after that. And even now, sometimes, when the wind rattles the windows at night, I remember the sound of those footsteps moving across the floor above me, and I wonder if it could ever happen again. When I was 8, my mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and I'd stay home alone after school until she got back around 6. We lived in a small brick duplex near the highway, with neighbors on both sides and a lot of traffic noise. Mom had given me strict rules about never opening the door for anyone, no matter what they said. She would say, "You never know what someone wants. Just keep quiet and let them go away." I followed her rules, mostly because the thought of getting in trouble scared me more than anything. That Tuesday afternoon was normal. I let myself in with the key I wore on a string around my neck, locked the door, dropped my backpack in the hallway, and turned on the TV. It was Tom and Jerry, which was my favorite. The sun was coming in through the little window over the sink, making the kitchen look warm and yellow. I sat cross-legged on the rug with a bowl of dry cereal. I could hear the hum of cars passing outside and the distant sound of a lawnmower. It was one of those days when you just feel lazy, and I didn't have any homework. Sometime after 4, I heard a car door slam. I glanced out the window but didn't see anything, just our empty driveway and the neighbor's old minivan. I didn't think much about it until, a few minutes later, someone knocked on the front door. It wasn't loud, just a steady, careful knock, 3 times. I froze. No one ever knocked during the day except the mailman, and he usually just left things in the box. I muted the TV and waited. Another knock, this time a bit harder. My heart was beating fast. I got up, tiptoed over to the door, and pressed my eye to the peephole like Mom taught me. I expected maybe a package or the neighbor from upstairs, but it was a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a dark suit, not like a funeral suit, but businesslike, and he had some kind of badge clipped to his jacket. He had short brown hair and a face that looked tired. He kept glancing over his shoulder down the street, then back at the door. He licked his lips and adjusted his badge, and it struck me that he didn't look comfortable. He knocked again, this time really loud, enough to rattle the door. I stepped back quickly, my foot catching on the edge of the rug. The bowl of cereal tipped over but didn't spill. I remembered what Mom said about never making a sound, so I stood still, holding my breath. He didn't leave right away. Instead, he shifted from foot to foot, looked at something in his hand, a notepad maybe, and then leaned forward to press the doorbell. I pressed myself flat against the wall. Through the wood, his voice came muffled but clear. "Hello? Child Protective Services. Open up, please." I didn't move. After a second, he called out again, louder, like he was used to people not answering. "This is CPS. Someone reported a child left home alone. I need to make sure everything's all right." He paused, then knocked again, even harder. My stomach dropped. I looked at the clock on the wall. Mom wouldn't be home for another hour at least. I tried to remember if she'd said anything about someone coming by, but I was sure she hadn't. The man's voice was friendly but serious, like the principal at school when someone was in trouble. "I just need to check that you're safe and have food and everything you need. Can you come to the door?" He sounded calm, like he was used to talking to kids, but I still didn't trust him. I pressed my eye back to the peephole. He was still there, standing with one hand in his pocket and the other gripping the edge of his jacket. His eyes kept moving, up the street, down the sidewalk, and then back to the door. He tapped his badge with his finger, like he wanted me to notice it, but something about the way he did it felt off, like he was trying too hard to look official. I watched him for another minute. He shifted his weight, glanced at the neighbor's yard, then wiped sweat off his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked like the older boys at school when they were trying to convince a teacher they hadn't done anything wrong. His movements were twitchy, impatient. I backed away from the door, heart thumping, and stood in the hallway where he couldn't see me through the glass. He called out again, this time almost pleading. "I can't leave until I talk to you, kid. You're not in trouble, but I have to make sure you're okay." I didn't answer. I thought about calling my mom at work, but I knew she'd be busy with patients. I just waited, holding the house key in my hand like it could protect me. The man stayed on the porch, glancing around, checking the street, and waiting for me to do something. The man knocked a third time, louder and sharper, and then said he really needed me to open up so he could do his job. He explained through the door that if I didn't cooperate, he'd have to call my mom at work, and she might get in trouble for leaving me alone. My hands were sweating. I didn't want Mom to get arrested or lose her job. But I remembered her voice, how strict she was when she practiced what to do in this exact situation. She had looked me in the eyes and made me promise, if anyone official ever showed up, I had to call her first, before opening the door. I took the cordless phone from the kitchen counter and ducked behind the table. I pressed the numbers for the hospital, my fingers slippery on the buttons. The phone rang twice, then a lady at the front desk answered. I asked for my mom in the emergency room. It felt like forever, but after a few seconds, my mom came on the line. Her voice was tense. I tried to whisper, telling her that a man from Child Services was at our door and wanted to come inside. She listened quietly, and asked me to describe exactly what he looked like, what he was wearing, what he'd said. I told her about the dark suit, the badge on his jacket, and the way he kept looking up and down the street. I could hear her typing something on a computer while we talked. Her words were quick and focused, asking about the badge, what color his hair was, if he had a car, and if I could see a license plate. I couldn't see his car from the peephole, only a flash of white through the front window. Mom told me to lock myself in the bathroom with the phone and not to come out no matter what the man said or did. She said she was going to call the Real Child Services office right then to check if they had sent anyone. I obeyed, hurrying to the bathroom, locking the door, and sitting on the cold tile with my back to the tub. I held the phone so tight it hurt my fingers. Outside the bathroom, the man was still knocking, sometimes calling out, sometimes just waiting. He tried my name, calling it softly like he already knew who I was, and that made me feel sick because I hadn't told him. Everything sounded louder and scarier in the little bathroom. It was barely 2 minutes before the phone rang again, and I almost dropped it picking up. Mom's voice was different now, hard and tight and angry. She told me that Child Services had no record of sending anyone to our house, and nobody by that description worked there. She was calling the police right now and leaving work, she said. I should stay in the bathroom no matter what happened, no matter what the man did or said. She said, "Don't hang up the phone unless the police are the ones on the line." I said okay, trying not to cry. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening for her voice. I heard the man try the front door again, rattling the handle. Then he called my name, this time in a regular voice, not pretending to be official. I stayed quiet, breathing as softly as I could. He knocked on the walls. Then I heard footsteps going around the side of the house. My heart pounded in my chest. I stared at the crack under the bathroom door, waiting to see shadows, but none came. I listened for the sound of breaking glass or the back door, but all I heard was my own breathing and the hum of the fan. Every few minutes I heard a distant car go by and wondered if it was the police or Mom. After what felt like forever, I heard Mom's car in the driveway. I heard the front door open and her calling my name, but I didn't answer until she knocked on the bathroom door and used our family code word. I opened it and ran straight into her arms. She was shaking and holding her phone. The man was gone. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was standing in our front yard, still in her gardening gloves. She had written down the man's license plate and called the police as soon as she saw him walking quickly to his car and leaving. The police came about 10 minutes later and talked to Mom and Mrs. Patterson in the living room. They said the man was a repeat offender who posed as various officials to get inside homes and case them for burglaries. He'd done this before in other neighborhoods, and sometimes waited until people left to break in. They arrested him 2 days later trying the same scam at another house across town. The officers told Mom she'd done everything right, and that sometimes kids listened better than adults when it came to their instincts. That night, Mom let me sleep in her bed with the door locked and all the lights on in the hallway. After that, she changed the locks, bought new deadbolts, and even got a camera for the porch. I never stayed home alone after school again, but if I did, I knew exactly what to do. I learned that when something feels wrong, it probably is, and that trusting your gut isn't just something adults say to make kids feel better. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and something much worse. So when I was in college, our group had this spot we called the alley because of all the tall trees lining both sides of this abandoned county road. We'd drive out there most weekends to smoke and drink beer away from campus security and our parents. The guys always told ghost stories about the place to freak out the girls, but none of us really believed that stuff. It was just a quiet road where nobody bothered us. The trees grew so thick you could barely see the stars, and the old asphalt had cracked in long lines from years of frost and heat. Sometimes deer would cross in the headlights, or a possum, and that was about as exciting as it got. Usually it was me, Ben, Jake, and Sarah. Sometimes a couple others. Ben had this old Honda with a tape deck and no working heater, so we'd bundle up and sit around with the engine idling, radio low, windows cracked. That night was colder than usual, the windows fogged over and the beer cans sweating on the dash. It was late November and the leaves had all fallen, just black branches stretching overhead. I remember Ben was telling some story about a kid who'd gone missing out there in the 70s, and Sarah kept looking over her shoulder, rolling her eyes but clearly a little spooked. Jake was in the front seat, stretched out with his feet on the dash, flicking his lighter open and shut. I was in the back with Sarah, halfway through a beer, when Jake suddenly straightened up and leaned forward. "Hey," he said, squinting through the windshield. "Do you guys see that?" At first, nobody responded. Ben just laughed, thought he was starting up another story, but Jake sounded serious. "No, really. There's something in the road." I tried to look where he was pointing, but the windshield was a mess. Ben wiped a circle clear with his sleeve, and we all leaned forward. Maybe 50 yards ahead, the headlights hit something just at the edge of the beam. At first, it just looked like a shadow, long and thin across the faded white line in the middle of the road. Ben squinted, slowed the car a little, letting the engine idle down. "Probably a deer," he said, but his voice was quieter now. Sarah turned down the radio. The only sound was the hum of the heater fan rattling on its last legs. I looked out the window, trying to make out a shape, but at first there was just darkness and the glint of the road. Jake leaned closer to the dash, shading his eyes. "No, that's a person," he said, voice low. We all kind of laughed at that, but he didn't move, just kept watching. Ben eased his foot onto the brake, slowing down as we rolled closer. The headlights stretched farther out, illuminating the empty pavement, the cold air drifting in through the cracked window. And then, between the bars of shadow from the trees, I saw it too. A figure, just standing there, right in the center of the lane. It was weird, because nobody ever came out there at night. We'd been making noise for an hour and hadn't seen another car, hadn't even seen headlights on the horizon. The figure didn't move, just stood still with their back to us, facing down the road. Ben's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going pale. The car rolled another few yards, and we all fell silent. No one made a sound. The person wasn't walking, wasn't waving or looking for help, just stood there. It was too cold for anybody to be out without a reason. Even the deer had disappeared into the brush. Sarah shifted next to me, pulling her coat tighter, eyes fixed on the windshield. "Maybe we should turn around," she whispered. I could hear her breath, shaky and thin. But Ben just shook his head, staring straight ahead. "Hang on," he said, his voice not as steady as before. "Let's see what's going on." The headlights crawled over the road as Ben crept forward. The figure didn't move. We got close enough to see that it was a man, standing barefoot on the asphalt. He wore only torn jeans. No shirt, no shoes, nothing else, even though the air was biting cold. His skin looked pale in the harsh yellow light, almost bluish, and his hair hung in dirty strings over his face. None of us spoke. Sarah grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. Ben's knuckles were white on the wheel, Jake's hand frozen near the door handle. I stared at the man, trying to see his face, but he just stared straight ahead, swaying slightly on his feet. His arms hung loose at his sides, fingers curled as if they were numb from the cold. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days, or maybe he was on something. His eyes looked wild even from where we sat. The car inched forward, maybe another 5 feet, until we were only about 20 feet away. The figure stayed in the same spot, not reacting to the noise or the headlights. For a second, I thought maybe he was hurt, or drunk, or lost. There were no shoes, no jacket, nothing but the ragged jeans. The road was so quiet that I could hear the idle of the engine ticking over, the wet leaves scraping against the undercarriage. Nobody knew what to say. Sarah whispered again, "Ben, please, let's just go." But he kept creeping forward, curiosity in his eyes. As we pulled within 15 feet, the man suddenly snapped out of his trance and turned. He looked directly at our car. His eyes were completely dilated and seemed to glow in the headlight beams. The guy's pupils were so wide you could barely see any color around them, just black circles that looked almost wet. He stared straight at us and started grinning, but it wasn't a normal smile. His lips pulled back too far, showing all his teeth like he was baring them, and the corners of his mouth twitched. For a few seconds, he just stood there with that grimace on his face, the muscles in his neck jerking like he was fighting off a cramp. Then he began to walk toward the car, but the way he moved was off. It wasn't just slow or tired, it was stiff and jerky, like each step took a second to register in his legs. His arms hung loose and his bare feet slapped against the pavement, echoing through the open windows. The sound was weirdly loud. Everyone in the back seat started freaking out. Jake kept saying, "Ben, go, go, go." And Sarah had both hands gripping my arm so tight I could feel her nails through my jacket. Ben just kept looking forward, maybe thinking the guy would stop or say something, but he didn't. He just kept coming. Now he was maybe 5 feet from our bumper, eyes locked on the windshield, face still stretched into that horrible grin. I could see the lines of dirt on his chest and arms, the way his ribs stuck out. His feet were red from the cold. Ben finally threw the car into reverse, tires squealing on the wet asphalt. That's when the guy did something that still gives me chills thinking about it. He suddenly lunged forward, breaking into a full sprint straight at us. His movements switched from slow and twitchy to lightning fast in an instant, like he was running for his life. The headlights caught his face for a second, mouth wide open now, eyes wild, his whole body moving with this weird animal energy. Ben stomped on the gas and we shot backwards, but instead of chasing us down the road, the man veered off to the right. Without missing a step, he ran straight for the ditch along the side of the road. The drainage canal there was at least 8 feet across and filled with dead leaves and old water bottles. He didn't even slow down, just leaped, clearing the entire thing in one bound and disappearing into the thick tangle of bushes on the other side. The branches snapped and rustled, and then everything was quiet again, except for the car engine and the sound of my own heartbeat. For a second, none of us spoke. Ben kept his foot on the brake, staring into the darkness where the man had vanished. Jake finally managed to say, "Did you see that?" But his voice came out hoarse, almost a whisper. Sarah was shaking, and I realized my own hands were clenched so tight around the seat, I could barely move my fingers. We all sat there, staring at the spot where the guy had disappeared, trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. Ben floored it in reverse until he could swing the car around, nearly backing into a tree, and then we peeled out, headlights bouncing off the trees and broken pavement. Nobody said anything for a long time. The radio was still off, and the only sounds in the car were our breathing and the whine of the engine as Ben sped back toward town. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the guy again, standing in the trees or running alongside the car. But there was nothing, just shadows in the road, empty again. When we finally made it back to campus, Ben parked in the first lot he could find and just sat there with his hands on the wheel, breathing hard. Sarah got out without saying a word, and Jake followed. I waited until Ben finally looked over at me, his face pale in the dashboard lights. "We're never going back there," he said, voice low and serious. I nodded, and that was the end of it. We all went our separate ways that night. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face. Those eyes and that broken smile. The next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started asking around campus, mostly with kids who'd grown up local. At first, nobody knew what I was talking about, but after a few tries, I heard from a girl in my history class about a drug rehab center about 2 miles through those woods, just over the ridge from the alley. She said people escape from there pretty regularly, sometimes showing up on the road or even at the gas station in the next town. She told me her brother worked part-time as a night guard at the center, and he'd seen some patients lose it completely, especially the ones detoxing off meth or bath salts. I tracked down a counselor from the center at a campus support event and tried to sound casual, just asking about weird things that might happen if someone was in withdrawal. He didn't laugh or roll his eyes. He just said, "We get people out here that are desperate. Some of them go days without sleep, some are hallucinating, some have full psychotic breaks. And when their adrenaline kicks in, they can do things you'd never expect. Run for miles, jump fences, fight off 4 security guards. Eyes get huge from the drugs, especially amphetamines. They don't even feel the cold." I asked about the glowing eyes and he nodded. "That's pupil dilation, meth, bath salts, certain stimulants. They lose all sense of pain. Sometimes they act like animals." After that, I stopped asking questions. We never went back to the alley again. Nobody in our group brought it up after that night. Ben got rid of his car a few months later. Jake started hanging out with a different crowd, and Sarah dropped out before Christmas. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see a shape at the edge of the road, I still tense up, waiting to see those eyes and that broken grin. What scared me the most wasn't the idea of ghosts or monsters. It was knowing that something like that could happen right here, in the real world, just a few miles from campus. Sometimes the most logical explanation for something terrifying is also the most disturbing, because it means there are people out there capable of things that seem impossible. I was a junior in college when this happened, just picking up some basic groceries after my evening lecture. The campus store stayed open late for students, and I just needed milk and bread for the next day's breakfast. The place was quiet as usual, only a couple other people in line and a cashier who looked half asleep, scrolling her phone while scanning. My bag was light, just 2 items, and the air outside was colder than I expected for March. Streetlights threw long shadows across the parking lot. I crossed through the sliding doors and heard them whir shut behind me. My bus stop was a short walk along the main street, maybe 3 minutes if I took the shortcut through the small alley behind the bookstore. But tonight, I wasn't in a hurry. I figured I'd just walk the main route since it was well lit. As soon as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I noticed a group of 5 guys on the corner, leaning against the fence next to the pizza place. They looked about my age, maybe a bit older, dressed casual, sweatshirts, sneakers, some with their hands in their pockets. At first, I thought they were just killing time, maybe waiting for a ride, but then I saw the way they kept glancing over at me. They'd talk to each other, then 1 or 2 would look my way, their voices lowering for a second before picking back up again. It wasn't obvious or loud, but it didn't seem right. I tried not to stare back, just looked down and kept walking, holding my grocery bag tight so it didn't swing. A few steps later, I pulled out my phone, more for something to do with my hands than anything, and I texted my roommate Samantha. "Heading home, might be a little late, save me a spot at the table." I told myself not to overthink it, But the way those guys watched me, it made me pick up my pace without really planning to. The sidewalk was empty except for them and me. I kept my eyes on the street, waiting for a car or anyone else to show up, but it was just quiet. The street lights buzzed a bit, and every time my shoes scuffed the concrete, the sound felt too loud. I checked my phone again, pretending to read something, but mostly to give myself a reason not to look up. As I passed closer, I heard one of them say something, but I couldn't make it out. Just the low sound of a laugh, maybe a word or two, then nothing. I didn't speed up, just kept a steady walk, like nothing was wrong. My bus stop was in sight now, the metal bench and the little glass shelter under a big advertising poster for some movie. I was almost relieved to see there was nobody else at the stop. Usually there were a couple students smoking or talking, but tonight it was just me. I stopped right at the edge of the shelter, still clutching my bag, and glanced at the digital board. 8 minutes till the next bus. I stood sideways, so I could keep an eye on the sidewalk without being obvious. The group on the corner didn't move for a minute or two, just kept talking, but I could tell their voices were quieter now. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the guys nod toward me. Two of them stepped off the curb and started walking, not fast, but not slow either, straight toward the bus stop. I shifted my weight, trying to act casual. I opened my phone to messages, thinking about texting Samantha again, but then I noticed I had a text from my mom. The message just said, "Are you getting home safe tonight? I have a weird feeling about something." I froze for a second because that wasn't something she would normally send. She never checked in unless she knew I had a big test or was traveling late. She trusted me, always said I knew how to take care of myself. The timing was strange, almost like she knew something was off, and it made me pay more attention. I looked back at the group, and now I saw the other 3 guys had drifted a little farther apart along the sidewalk. They were spreading out, not just standing together anymore. 2 were moving toward the other side of the street. 1 was crossing slowly, and the last 2 kept coming straight toward me. It wasn't a random walk. They were putting themselves in different spots, and it didn't look casual at all. Their faces were blank, no smiles, just focused. My hands started to sweat, so I wiped my palm on my jacket, then put my phone to my ear, calling my mom instead of just texting her back. The phone rang as the 2 guys kept walking, and I stood there, my eyes on the ground, pretending to listen for the bus. The ring seemed to last forever, but I kept it there, trying not to show my face, not to give away how fast my heart was pounding. The night air felt sharp and cold on my neck, and my grocery bag felt heavier than before. While the phone rang, I tried to keep my movement steady. My eyes were mostly on the sidewalk, but I watched the guys out of my peripheral vision. The first 2 were definitely closing in, and the others had taken positions along both sides of the street, like they were setting something up. I gripped my phone a little tighter, praying my mom would pick up. She answered right away, and her voice was sharp, not her usual relaxed tone. She asked, "Where are you? Are you okay?" I didn't waste time. I told her I was near the campus store and that there was a group of guys acting strange, following me near the bus stop. She didn't hesitate. "Don't ignore your instincts. If you feel something is off, trust it. Stay somewhere safe and don't try to get to the bus. Find a well-lit place, somewhere with people. Call campus security if you need to." She sounded even more anxious after I explained how the group was spreading out, how they seemed coordinated. While she talked, I could see the 5 guys moving with purpose, not even pretending to be casual anymore. The 2 closest to me picked up their pace, closing the gap to less than 20 feet. I started walking, not to the bus stop, but back toward the store entrance and the bright lights. Mom told me to stay on the phone, and that she'd call Dad and keep tracking me if I needed to run. As I turned back toward the store, I tried not to look panicked. My footsteps were quick but measured. I glanced once over my shoulder and saw all 5 of them change direction too, but it was subtle at first. I pushed my pace just a little faster and kept my phone pressed to my ear. I could see the security guard at the store entrance, just where I'd noticed him earlier. There were customers coming in and out, light flooding the entrance, voices echoing out. My mom kept talking, urging me to move faster, telling me not to worry about the groceries if I had to drop them. Right as I reached the edge of the parking lot and started up the short walkway to the doors, the entire group suddenly veered off into a narrow alley next to the pizza place. They didn't bother keeping up the act anymore. No slow walking, no talking. They just slipped away all at once, disappearing out of sight. I kept moving, straight toward the automatic doors that slid open with a shh, spilling warm light and music from inside. The security guard was standing just inside, talking with a couple customers. I stepped right up to him and asked if he could call me a taxi. My voice was calm, but I could feel the tension in my hands, my whole body kind of buzzing with the realization of what just happened. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded, pulled out his phone, and made the call. I stayed close by, standing near the checkout lanes with other people around. It felt safer instantly, but I didn't let my guard down. My mom was still on the phone, asking if I was okay, if the group had followed. I told her what I'd seen, how they just slipped away once I headed back to the store. She said, "You did exactly the right thing. Don't worry about being polite or embarrassed. Trust your gut, always." I kept her on the line while I waited, not wanting to stand alone for even a minute. The taxi pulled up in less than 10 minutes. The security guard waited with me by the door until I got in, and I thanked him quickly, still scanning the parking lot and the shadows beyond the streetlights. The ride home was quiet. I kept looking out the window, thinking about how close I'd come to something going wrong. My mom called again as soon as I was inside the apartment. Samantha was already there, asking if I was okay, if something had happened. I told her what happened, and she just shook her head, saying she'd always hated that stretch of road at night. I locked the door, checked it twice, and tried to push the thoughts out of my mind. The next morning, I was half awake when my phone buzzed with a campus safety email. There was a warning about increased robberies and group attacks in the area between the grocery store and the bus stop, especially after dark. The email described the same tactics I'd seen: groups splitting up, targeting students who were walking alone, sometimes pretending to be separate until the last second. A few students had already been robbed. One was even sent to the hospital after being jumped. Police were investigating, saying it looked like an organized group targeting college kids coming back from classes or night shifts. I never found out for sure if those 5 guys were connected to the crimes, or if it was just a coincidence. But the details matched too closely to ignore. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it would have been for them to close in if I'd stayed at the bus stop, or if I'd tried to walk away down a side street alone. The whole thing made me rethink my usual routines: what time I did my shopping, how I got home, how I always kept my head down and tried to avoid making a scene. Mom later told me she just had this strong urge to text, something that almost never happened. She said she woke up from a nap, checked the clock, and thought of me for no reason. I don't know if it was just luck or some kind of sixth sense, but it probably saved me from something bad that night. Since then, I pay attention to those gut feelings. I listen to the people who care about me, even when it doesn't seem logical at the time. There's always a reason for a warning, even if you can't see it yet. Sometimes, what feels like a random worry is actually the only thing between you and something much worse. I'll never ignore those feelings again. It was my second year of medical school, and I was driving home from the university library around midnight on a November weeknight. I'd been studying for my anatomy exam until they kicked everyone out at closing time. My brain was tired, and my backpack felt heavier than usual as I walked to the parking lot. The wind was sharp and cold, pushing dried pine needles across the cracked pavement. My car was one of only a few left, sitting under a flickering yellow streetlight. I unlocked it and got in fast, locking the doors before turning the key. The engine made this low groan before it finally started, and I let out a shaky breath. I'd only had my license for about 6 months and wasn't comfortable with night driving yet. The windows fogged up quick from my breath, so I turned the heat on and waited until I could see the glass clear a little. The route home took me down County Road K. I usually avoided it after dark because the narrow road made me nervous, but tonight I just wanted to get home as quick as possible. The alternative was a much longer drive through town with a bunch of red lights, and I just didn't have the patience. County Road K was pretty isolated, lined on both sides by tall pine trees that blocked out most of the moonlight and made these weird, shaky shadows that moved across my headlight beams as I drove. I fiddled with the radio, hoping to find some music to keep me awake, but the station kept cutting in and out, leaving these bursts of static. It made the silence in the car feel even heavier. I kept my hands tight on the wheel and tried to keep my eyes moving between the lines on the road and the tree line. I noticed the ditches on both sides, full of old leaves and half-rotted logs, and made a mental note to avoid getting too close to the edge. The road was so empty that my headlights seemed too bright, like I was the only thing moving in miles. Every once in a while, I'd catch a glimpse of a deer's eyes reflecting back at me from the trees, just a couple white dots that disappeared as fast as they appeared. My stomach started to feel unsettled. I told myself it was just nerves, just the way the woods seemed to close in at night. My speed stayed a little under the limit. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard. Each minute dragged on. Every time my tires rolled over a patch of gravel or hit a pothole, I flinched, thinking about how far away I was from any help if something went wrong. I passed a broken road sign hanging by one bolt, swinging back and forth in the wind. The metal made a soft, regular tapping sound against the pole that echoed in the silence. For a second, I thought about turning around and finding another route, but I was already halfway there, so I just gripped the wheel tighter. Halfway home, the road curved sharply to the right. My headlights caught on something up ahead, a shape on the shoulder. At first, it looked like just another shadow, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. My hands got sweaty on the wheel. I tapped the brakes and squinted, trying to see through the glare of my headlights bouncing off the yellow reflectors. There was a woman standing at the side of the road, her arm out and thumb pointed up, like she was hitchhiking. She looked thin, maybe about my age or a little older, bundled up in a dirty coat and jeans. My first instinct was to stop. Leaving someone stranded in the middle of nowhere on a cold night felt wrong, even though I felt a little scared. I slowed down and pulled over a few yards ahead of her. I rolled my window down just a crack and leaned over, keeping one hand on the gear shift. "Do you need help?" My voice sounded shaky, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked up to the passenger side window, moving quick. In the weak light from my dashboard, I could see her better. Her hair was messy, dark strands stuck to her cheeks, and her clothes looked disheveled and dusty. She kept shifting her weight from foot to foot, glancing up and down the road like she was looking for someone or something in the darkness. Her fingers tapped against her thigh, twitching and restless. "Yeah, I need a ride," she said, her voice almost a whisper. My car broke down a ways back. "Please, it's freezing out here." She kept looking around, almost like she expected someone else to show up out of the woods. Her eyes didn't settle on me for more than a second at a time. I noticed the scratches on her hands, dirt under her nails, the torn edge of her jacket sleeve. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering hard. The radio sputtered back to life for a moment, filling the car with a burst of static, then cutting out again. The sound made her flinch. I asked where she was headed and she mumbled something I couldn't quite catch, eyes darting to the darkness behind my car. The air inside the car felt tight, heavy with her nervous energy. I felt a strong urge to roll the window up, but she was already gripping the edge of the glass with her fingers. I looked up and down the road. There were no other cars, just the two of us in the middle of a black, empty stretch. She leaned in closer, her breath visible in the cold air, and waited for me to say something. She said her name was Sarah, and her voice shook when she talked. She pointed down the road behind us, saying her car had broken down maybe 2 or 3 miles back, close to a bend in the road. She kept telling the story, but it never really sounded right to me. She said she'd tried to flag someone earlier, but no one else had come by, and now her phone was dead. Even in the half-dark, I could see her pupils were huge, almost filling the color of her eyes. She kept fidgeting with her fingers, rubbing her hands together and tapping the glass with her nails, her words coming out a little slurred. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where's your car? Did you call anyone?" I asked, and she shook her head, looking down. She pressed closer to the window, glancing into my back seat like she was checking to see if I was alone, or if anyone else was with me. The back of my neck felt cold. I started to feel sure she wasn't just cold or scared, but maybe high or drunk. Something about her made the hair on my arms stand up. She said she just needed a ride to the nearest gas station, but I noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder, scanning the dark woods behind her like she was looking for something or someone. My instincts were screaming at me. My first reaction was to let her in, but something about the way she kept shifting her weight, her eyes darting around my car, the strange tension in her voice, all of it made me freeze. I reached down for my phone, but I already knew there was no signal out here. I forced a tight smile and said, "Look, I'll call for roadside assistance when I get back to town. I can let them know you're stuck out here. Maybe even the sheriff's office can send a patrol to check on you." I kept my hand on the gear shift, ready to put the car in drive if anything happened. She hesitated, biting her lip. No, you don't get it. I need to go now. Please, just unlock the door. It's freezing, I swear, I'm not crazy." Her voice got sharper. She looked at my hands and then right at me. I could smell something strong, chemical, coming off her clothes and breath. My knuckles were white on the wheel. "Sorry," I said. "I can't let anyone in my car this late at night. I'll call help, I promise." I tried to roll up the window a little, but she reached out and grabbed the edge of the glass, her fingers pressing hard enough to make it squeak. For a second, we just stared at each other. She kept her hand on my window, and her eyes kept flicking to the woods, and then to my back seat again. I noticed her jacket was missing a button, and her pants were muddy from the knees down. "Please," she repeated, her voice suddenly cracking. "Please, I just need to get out of here. You don't understand." The desperation in her voice felt real, but everything else about her was wrong. I shook my head, tried to stay calm, and kept my foot ready to hit the gas. "I'll send help as soon as I get a signal. I promise," I said. Then I rolled the window up an inch at a time. She finally let go. Suddenly her face changed. All the pleading dropped away, and her eyes narrowed. She tried the passenger door, yanking at the handle twice, but I'd locked it out of habit as soon as I got in. She hit the window with her palm. "Come on, let me in, you idiot." Her voice was loud, echoing off the trees. "You're leaving me out here to die, you prick. Open the door." She slammed her palm against the glass. My hands shook as I shifted the car into drive. I started rolling forward, my heart pounding, and she followed alongside, still pulling at the door handle. "Just let me in," she shouted. "Just open the fucking door." I didn't look at her anymore, just stared at the road ahead. I pressed the gas pedal and pulled away, headlights stretching over the dark road. She kept shouting after me, but the sound faded fast as I picked up speed. When I finally glanced back in the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, small and pale in my taillights, not moving. She didn't chase me. She just stood there, staring at my car, her fists clenched at her sides. I didn't stop until I hit the first stop sign near the edge of town. I pulled over under a streetlight and tried to steady my breathing. I checked my phone again. Finally, 2 bars of service. I typed out a quick message to my roommate that I was running late, and then just sat there staring at my shaking hands. I replayed the whole encounter in my head, over and over, trying to decide if I'd just been paranoid, or if something really bad could have happened if I'd opened that door. The next morning, I woke up early and went straight to the kitchen. My mom was making toast, and the smell of burnt bread filled the house. I sat down with my cereal and turned on the small TV on the counter. The local news was running, and I only half listened until the anchor's voice cut through my thoughts. "Breaking news this morning out of Waterview County," she said, "where police arrested a woman for attempted robbery on County Road K around 1 a.m. I looked up, heart thudding in my chest. The screen flashed a blurry mugshot, a thin woman with messy hair and a wild look in her eyes. The name under her photo was Sarah Wilson. The anchor kept talking, saying Sarah had been stopping cars on the road, claiming her car had broken down, and then threatening drivers with a weapon once she got inside. A truck driver who stopped after me had been her first real victim. He'd let her in, and she'd pulled a knife, demanding his wallet and phone. He'd managed to jump out and flag down another car, and Sarah had run off into the woods. Police picked her up later, walking along the highway, still carrying the knife. I just sat there staring at the TV. It took a long minute before I moved. I called the police tip line, hands shaking all over again, and told them what happened with her and my car the night before. They took my statement and said someone might follow up, but I never heard anything after that. The story ran in the paper for a few days and then faded, but I kept thinking about how close I'd come. If I'd unlocked the door, if I'd just tried to help without thinking, maybe I would have ended up on the news instead of just watching it. Now, whenever I drive that road at night, I check my doors twice and never stop for anything except blue lights or flashing hazards. Sometimes I think about Sarah and wonder how many other people just trusted the wrong stranger for a second too long. I guess trusting your instincts can be the thing that saves your life. So when I was 26, I decided to take a weekend trip to some small mountain town in Oregon. I just needed to get out of the city for a bit, something quiet. I found this rental on one of those apps. Looked basic but cheap, kind of an old house, but I thought it'd be fine for a couple nights. The drive up there was long, almost 7 hours because of traffic, winding roads, and stopping for food. By the time I pulled into town, the sun was already gone, and the streetlights barely worked. Most of the neighborhood was old wood houses, peeling paint, the sort of place that feels like nobody's in a rush. My rental was on a little side street at the edge of town, maybe 5 houses in a row, all pretty much the same style. Wide porches, dark windows, faded numbers on the mailboxes. When I parked in the driveway, I noticed almost every porch light was off. It was too quiet, except for the sound of gravel crunching under my tires and some bug zapper a couple houses down. The air smelled like pine and something stale. As I grabbed my bag out of the trunk, an old blue sedan came around the corner and pulled up next door. Headlights stayed on, kind of lighting up both driveways. At first, I thought it was just another renter or maybe the owner coming home. But the car just idled there, engine running. I waited around, pretending to check my phone, but nobody got out. 10 minutes, 15, Then 20 went by. The driver didn't move, just sat there with the headlights pointed at the house and sometimes flicked the turn signal on for no reason. After about half an hour, they finally shut the car off, but the guy never got out. I went inside, locking the door behind me, and peeked through the blinds a couple times. Still, nothing. Just the car sitting there, all fogged up from the inside. The rental itself was rough. Smelled a little like mildew and old carpet. There was a couch with some stains, the kind of kitchen where the counters had old burns in them, and a crooked picture of a river on the wall. I put my bag in the bedroom and checked all the windows to make sure they were locked. The neighborhood was silent except for the occasional clunk from pipes or maybe the fridge. I made some tea, sat at the little kitchen table with my phone, and tried not to think about the sedan still out there. It was almost 11 when I heard the car door next door finally slam. Footsteps crunched on the gravel, slow and dragging, not in a hurry. The steps got louder, and I realized they were moving toward my side of the yard, not the neighbor's porch. Then nothing. Just stopped. I waited, listening, not wanting to look out the window in case someone was staring right back at me. After a while, I figured they'd gone back to their car, or maybe just stood in the shadows. I brushed my teeth, turned on the bedroom light, and made sure the door was locked. The rental didn't have deadbolts, just a flimsy knob lock. I lay in bed with the covers up, phone plugged in next to me, trying to relax. At some point, I heard a creak on the porch, maybe just the house settling, maybe something else, but it faded. I finally drifted off a little after midnight, figuring it was probably nothing. I woke up around 3 in the morning for no reason. It was dead quiet, colder than before, and I felt this tension in my chest like I'd just had a nightmare. I listened, nothing but the fridge clicking. Then I noticed this faint shape at the edge of the curtains, a shadow not moving. I sat up and peered through the gap. There was a person, just a dark silhouette, standing by the fence that separated my rental from the next house. Not walking, not smoking, not moving, just standing there, head turned toward my window. I couldn't see a face, just the outline, but I knew they saw me looking. The figure jerked back suddenly, then slipped into the shadows out of sight. I froze, just holding the curtain, trying to listen for footsteps, for a car, for anything. There was nothing but my heartbeat. I sat there, eyes glued to the glass, not sure what to do. After about a minute, I heard footsteps again, but this time they were coming from inside the house. The old floorboards creaked. Just once, then another step, slow and heavy, moving down the hallway that led toward the exit. I realized the front door hadn't been locked properly, and someone had just walked right in. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if they were still inside, or if they'd already left, but I wasn't about to go searching. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and dialed the local sheriff's number. It took a while to get through, and when I explained what happened, the deputy on duty just sounded tired. He asked if there was any damage, if anything was stolen, or if I could see someone right now. I told him there wasn't any damage, at least none that I could see, but someone had definitely been inside the house, and I'd seen a person out by my fence. The deputy said that without any actual damage or theft, there wasn't much they could investigate. He sounded bored, like this sort of thing happened a lot out there. I asked if they could at least send someone out to check the area or drive by. He said they were short-staffed tonight, and all he could do was make a note in their log. He suggested I keep my doors locked and call back if anything else happened. That was it. No patrol car, no reassurance. I sat in the living room with the kitchen lights on, gripping a kitchen knife, barely breathing. Every little sound, pipes creaking, wind moving the porch swing, made me flinch. I turned on every light, pulled the curtains tight and sat by the front door so I could see if anyone tried to come back. The night crawled by. I couldn't relax or close my eyes for more than a few seconds. The idea that a stranger had just walked into my rental and then disappeared left me with this low, cold dread. I watched the windows until dawn. I never found out who the intruder was, and nobody seemed interested in finding out either. I barely slept for the remaining few hours until it started to get light outside. As soon as the sun rose, I started packing my stuff. The sky was gray and the air was still cold. I kept looking out the windows, expecting to see the sedan still parked outside, but it was gone. The street was empty. No neighbors, no traffic, just birds and the sound of my car door slamming. I walked around the outside of the rental, double-checking all the windows. That's when I saw the footprints in the dirt. 2 sets, one coming right up to the back window and stopping there. Then more prints near the side of the porch. There were scratches around the front door lock, fresh enough that you could still see some splinters. Someone had been trying to get in quietly, maybe more than once. I took out my phone and snapped photos from every angle, sent them to the rental company and the sheriff's office. I got an automated reply from the rental company and nothing from the sheriff. When I called the company later, they just said, "We'll look into it." But nothing happened. Nobody seemed to care. I stood outside for a while, just staring at the dirt, trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, I just wanted to get away from there. I drove straight home that morning, barely stopping for gas. My hands were tight on the wheel the whole time, checking my mirrors way more than usual. I was supposed to stay 2 more nights, but there was no chance I'd stick around after that. When I got back to my apartment, I kept checking the locks and staring at the windows before I could even think about sleeping. I emailed the rental company again, and after a week of back and forth, they refunded half my money. Their message made it clear that break-ins were just a normal risk of staying in that town, and not their fault. I called the sheriff's office one last time to ask if they had any updates, but the deputy said the case was basically closed. No leads, no suspects, nothing to follow up. They didn't even offer advice. I stopped hearing from them after that call. Weeks went by and I kept thinking about that shadow by the fence, the car with the headlights on, the way the footsteps in the house sounded so sure and deliberate. I wondered if the person was after something specific or just looking for a place to hide or steal from. I'll never know. Maybe nothing would have happened if I hadn't woken up. Or maybe things would have been much worse. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I think about how easy it was for someone to just walk in and disappear. No explanation, no reason. The scariest part is not knowing who was out there or what they wanted, only that they were watching, waiting, and then gone. Sometimes the worst stories are the ones where you never get any answers at all. When I was 25, I worked as a pharmacist at this small 24-hour pharmacy on the outskirts of Portland. The place was tucked into a worn-out strip mall, just a little storefront with buzzing overhead lights, old linoleum floors, and racks of generic medicine stretching from the front counter all the way to the cold drinks fridge and back. That evening was supposed to be pretty normal, just the usual night shift routine. My coworker Kim called in sick last minute, and the owner texted me that he trusted me with the keys and that he'd drop by in the morning. I didn't mind too much. Money was tight, and I'd pulled solo shifts before. The air in the store always felt stale at night. I spent the first part of my shift restocking aspirin, lining up cough syrups, wiping down the front counter while keeping an eye out the glass window. Most customers were regulars, old men picking up heart meds, night shift nurses grabbing snacks, truckers stopping for caffeine pills. Around 9:30, The bell on the door chimed and this middle-aged guy walked in. He looked about 50, thinning hair, heavy beard shadow, a wrinkled brown jacket zipped up tight even though it was warm inside. He kept his hands stuffed in his pockets. He didn't look at me or say anything, just shuffled straight to the vitamin aisle. I watched him out of habit, not really worried. People sometimes acted weird at night, zoning out, staring at shelves for too long. But this guy was different. He stood there with his head kind of tilted, eyes half shut, just staring at one spot on the far wall. At first I figured he was reading a label or waiting for someone, but after 5 minutes, he still hadn't moved. He didn't pick up anything. I went about my business, scanning inventory and ringing up a young couple who came in for allergy meds. After another 10 minutes, the guy was still there, not moving an inch. I called out, "Can I help you find something?" No answer. He didn't even turn. I tried again, a bit louder. "Sir, do you need help?" Nothing. He just kept staring at the same patch of wall, his back to me, shoulders tense and hunched like he was bracing for something. It started to bother me, the way he just stood there, not blinking, not moving. I thought maybe he was on something or maybe just sleepwalking. There wasn't much I could do, so I stayed at the register and kept an eye on him. The rest of the store was empty. The humming fridge, the overhead fan clicking in the corner, the whir of the security camera behind me. I checked my phone, scrolled through some news, but I kept glancing up every few seconds. 20 minutes went by. The guy's still there, frozen. I wondered if I should call someone, maybe security, maybe an ambulance. But he wasn't doing anything, just standing. I moved a little closer, halfway down the aisle, and tried again. "Sir, are you okay?" Still nothing. No reaction at all. He didn't flinch or turn around. I stopped a few feet away, the silence feeling thick and awkward. I could see the side of his face now. Cheeks red, eyes sort of bloodshot, mouth set in a hard line. I went back to the register, pretending to count receipts, but really I was just waiting for him to leave. Every few minutes I glanced at the clock. The store was dead quiet, the street outside empty except for the glow of a streetlight bouncing off a puddle. A city bus hissed past. It felt like the kind of silence that gets under your skin, like you're waiting for something bad to happen, but nothing ever does. After about 30 minutes of this, the guy finally moved. No warning. He just turned around and looked right at me. His eyes were red, wide and sharp, the way people look after not sleeping for days. He didn't say anything, just stared. I froze for a second, holding a pen in one hand, trying not to look nervous. Then, as quick as he came in, he turned and walked straight out the front door, letting it bang shut behind him. He didn't buy anything. Didn't look back. I waited a minute before following him to the front of the store, just to see where he went. The parking lot was empty. No cars driving away, nobody on the sidewalk. I stood at the window for a minute before heading over to the vitamin aisle to see what he'd been staring at. It was just a normal wall. Posters for flu shots, a shelf of cough drops, a cardboard display for sleep aids. Nothing unusual, nothing missing. I checked to see if anything was out of place, but everything looked exactly the same as always. It felt wrong somehow, like I was missing something important, but I couldn't see what. I tried to shake off the weird feeling and went back to my routine. Cleaned the counter, restocked some Tylenol, answered a couple of late phone calls for prescription refills. I kept glancing at the door, expecting the guy to come back or for something else weird to happen, but it stayed quiet. Around 12:30, the streets outside were empty. I started my closing procedures, turning off the neon "Open 24 hours" sign, pulling receipts from the register, counting the cash out. I always did it by the book, locking the safe, double-checking the windows. I set aside a bag of trash to take out before locking up for the night. The pharmacy had a small back room with a service exit that led out to a dark, narrow alley behind the strip mall. The alley was always kind of creepy, with broken asphalt, a couple of flickering bulbs, and dumpsters stacked against the wall. I grabbed the bag of trash, made sure I had my phone and keys, and headed toward the service exit at the back. The metal door groaned as I pushed it open. The alley was silent except for a distant car horn and the buzz of the broken security light overhead. I stepped out, letting the door swing shut behind me as I started walking toward the dumpster. Suddenly, there was this loud crash from inside the building, a sharp breaking sound that echoed through the alley and made my heart start pounding. For a second, I froze, gripping the trash bag. Then I realized it was coming from the back room. Someone had just smashed the storage area window. My mind went blank except for one thought. There was no way that was an accident. I dropped the bag and ran to the side door, pressing up against the wall. I could see the broken window and the glass all over the tile floor. That same man from earlier was climbing in, the guy with the wrinkled jacket and bloodshot eyes. He was holding a brick in one hand, stepping over the glass with slow, shaky movements. I stood there in the alley, completely exposed, barely breathing. My keys were in my pocket, but I couldn't move. He hadn't seen me yet. For a second, I thought about yelling or trying to lock him inside, but then he glanced over, face half lit by the hallway lights, and I panicked. I turned and bolted for the front of the building. My shoes slipped on the pavement and I ran through the empty parking lot, around to the main entrance. The street was dead, just distant headlights, no people anywhere. I yanked my phone out, hands shaking so hard I could barely dial. I called emergency services and managed to get out my address, trying to keep my voice steady. I told them there was a break-in, described the man and the smashed window, said I was outside and safe. The operator told me to stay put. Help was on the way. I stood on the curb, watching the doors, listening for sirens. Every minute felt like 10. I kept thinking about the alley, the broken glass, the guy's face staring at me. After about 10 minutes, a security guard pulled up in a marked car, then another. They went inside first, flashlights drawn. I pointed out the alley and told them what I saw. They went through the whole place. Back room, aisles, storeroom, nothing. The guy was already gone. But when the police came and checked the security cameras, they had him on tape both times. First just standing in the aisle for 30 minutes, and then breaking in through the window. His face was clear as day. The next day, I got called in to talk to the police. The detective was a big guy, older, with a serious look. He told me the man in the video was a known drug addict who'd been picked up before for stealing prescription drugs. According to the police, he'd been watching the pharmacy for several days. They showed me photos from the alley behind the building, empty food wrappers, a rolled-up blanket, an old plastic bag full of clothes. The detective said the guy had been sleeping back there, watching us close up every night, probably waiting for the right moment. He had a notebook with rough sketches of the building, and some notes about when people left and where the cameras were. The detective explained that people who are desperate for drugs sometimes spend weeks casing a place, learning schedules, looking for any weakness. He said the man had probably expected me to leave through the alley, not the front, and when he saw me outside, he panicked. My early exit threw off his plan. They said he must have been high when he broke the window, because he didn't even try to hide or grab the cameras. After the break-in, they put out an alert to other pharmacies in the area. The pharmacy owner came in later that day. The window was boarded up and glass was still on the floor. He didn't say much, just checked the back room and called the insurance company. They paid for a new window, cleaned up the glass, replaced a couple of broken shelves. I had to write a report for the insurance, and after a couple of days, they approved some compensation for lost wages and emotional distress. I didn't feel much except tired. I transferred to a different pharmacy downtown. It was bigger, with more staff on every shift, and a real security system with alarms and metal shutters. They never scheduled anyone alone. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from the detective. They'd caught the guy trying to break into another pharmacy across town. He was arrested before he even got inside. This time he had a crowbar and some syringes in his backpack. They charged him with attempted burglary and possession of drug paraphernalia. I had to go in and ID him, which was easy. He looked exactly the same as he had in my store. Tired, angry, and desperate. That was the last I heard about it. The owner thanked me for reacting fast. My new co-workers didn't ask questions, but a couple of them said they never trusted the night shift anyway. I never worked alone again. I kept thinking about that first night, how normal it all seemed at the start. It made me realize how important it is to trust your gut. You never really know who's watching or what they're planning, even in a place that feels as boring and safe as a pharmacy. I worked as a bartender at this place called Rodeo, right off the highway between Phoenix and Tucson. Most nights were slow, just a handful of regulars, truckers coming through on long hauls, local ranchers and farmers with weathered hands, a few guys who lived in trailers up the road. After a while, you get used to the routines of people. There's the guy who orders 2 burgers and a black coffee every Tuesday. There's the old couple who split a plate of fries and sip cheap beer until close. Most nights I'd watch the highway lights through the front windows, the neon sign flickering, the sound of country music low in the background. There was a kind of comfort in the repetition. After 3 years of night shifts, I knew all the stories, all the faces, the way the place felt at midnight when the traffic disappeared and the lights felt too bright for the empty bar. That night started the same as any other. A few regulars played pool near the back. Some old-timers nursed bottles of beer at the bar. The clock above the kitchen door ticked louder when the room got quiet, which it did most nights around 11. I was wiping down the counter when the door opened and someone new stepped inside. He was alone, tall and thin, black hair visible under a navy baseball cap pulled low over his face. He wore sunglasses even though the only light outside was from the sodium lamps in the parking lot. The whole look was strange. Long sleeves, heavy jeans, work boots, and those dark glasses in a place where everyone knew each other. He didn't look around much, just walked straight to the bar and sat down at the far end, close to where he could see the whole room. He asked for a whiskey, neat, and I poured it. His voice was flat and quiet, hard to place the accent. He put a 20 on the bar, told me to keep the change, and didn't say anything else. Instead of turning toward the TV like most people, he sat at an angle so he could watch the door and the windows. Every few minutes he glanced toward the bathrooms and the kitchen. I pretended not to notice, but you work bars long enough. You know when someone's casing the place or waiting for something. He didn't talk to anybody, didn't look at the waitresses or the regulars. Just sipped his drink slow and kept his head down, hands resting on the bar. After a while, I saw him pull out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. He opened it and started writing. Just a few words at a time, quick scribbles, then closing it again and looking up like he was checking to see if anyone had noticed. I kept wiping glasses, watching in the mirror behind the bar. The regulars noticed him too. You could see them whispering by the jukebox, looking over their shoulders. It's rare for someone new to show up at Rodeo this late, and the ones who do are usually just lost, or drunk, or passing through. But this guy didn't look lost or drunk. He was watching, always watching, even while he drank. After midnight, the regulars started heading out. The couple left first, waving goodnight like always. Then the pool players finished their game and went out to their trucks, boots echoing on the concrete outside. The old guys by the bar left, muttering about early mornings. By 1 a.m. it was just me and the stranger. I started stacking chairs on tables and counting the till, but he didn't move, just kept writing in that notebook. He stood up and walked over to the bar, leaving his empty glass behind. Up close, he was older than I'd thought. Lines around his mouth, stubble on his chin. He leaned on the counter and started asking questions in a way that made it sound like small talk, but wasn't. He asked how many people worked there at night. I told him usually just 2, sometimes 3 if it was busy. He nodded, looked around, asked if we had cameras. I said yes, 1 over the bar, 1 by the back door. He wanted to know if they recorded all night, if anyone checked them. I just said the owner watched them sometimes, nothing more. He asked if we ever had trouble, robberies, fights, anything like that. I shrugged. Not really, I said. People around here know each other. He looked over at the register, then back at me. That where you keep the cash? He said, nodding at the register. I told him we dropped money in the safe every few hours, just tips in the drawer after midnight. He didn't respond right away. Just glanced at the clock on the wall, then at the front door, like he was calculating something. He tapped his notebook on the bar. You work here alone a lot? He asked. I tried to keep my voice steady. Most nights, yeah. I started wiping the bar again, slow, trying to look normal. He watched my hands. I could feel the tension building. He was closer now, leaning over the bar, and I could smell sweat and cheap aftershave. I moved my foot under the counter, pressing the panic button with my shoe. It was wired to a little security company in Tucson. Usually took them about 15 minutes to send a car, sometimes less if someone was nearby. My heart was beating fast, but I kept my eyes down, nodding along to his questions. He asked about closing time, if I walked to my car alone, if anyone waited around after hours. I kept my answers short, trying not to give anything away. He stared at me for a long time, not blinking, not smiling, just waiting. I kept one hand on the towel, the other close to the drawer. The only sound in the room was the hum of the fridge and the faint whine of the neon sign outside. I watched the clock, counting the minutes. He set his notebook on the bar, open, and I could see a page filled with names, times, and short notes. He looked me up and down, then glanced at the door again, and I wondered if he was waiting for someone else, or just for the place to empty out completely. He started tapping his fingers on the bar, slow and steady, his eyes not leaving my face. I could hear the distant sound of a car on the highway, the headlights flashing through the front window, and I hoped it was the security guy. But the lot was still empty. Just my old Chevy by the dumpster and the stranger's black sedan parked crooked near the entrance. I kept wiping the bar, trying not to show my nerves. The stranger didn't move, just watched me, silent, his hand resting near his jacket pocket. The room felt colder now, and every second seemed to stretch out longer than the last. As soon as I saw him reach into his pocket, I dropped behind the counter. Something hit the edge of the bar with a loud bang, maybe a metal object, and I heard him curse under his breath. I kept as low as I could, heart racing, barely daring to breathe. The sirens outside started up all at once, red and blue lights flooding through the front windows and bouncing off the bottles behind the bar. The security company got there way faster than I'd expected, maybe just a few minutes after I pressed the button. I heard heavy footsteps, a door slam, and then the stranger bolted for the back exit. He didn't even bother taking his change or the notebook, both left right on the counter. I stayed where I was for a moment, waiting to see if he'd come back, but I only heard shouting and more footsteps as the security guards came in through the front. They told me to stay down while they checked the place, their flashlights sweeping every dark corner. The back door was wide open, swinging in the desert wind, but the man was gone. The only thing he left behind was the money and that little black notebook, Inside, there were pages filled with neat handwriting, a rough sketch of the bar layout, and lists of employees' names and work schedules. He'd written down when each person clocked out, when the place was busiest, and when it was empty. There were even quick diagrams showing the back room, the safe, and the parking lot. The last few pages were notes about closing routines, the alarm system, and different ways in and out. By the time the police showed up, the adrenaline was wearing off and my hands were shaking. I gave my statement to the officer while the security guards walked around with their radios, checking doors and windows. The police took photos of the notebook and asked me questions about the man, what he looked like, if I'd seen him before. One of the officers flipped through the notebook and found more notes on other places. A liquor store, a few exits down, a 24-hour diner, even a little motel next to the truck stop. Each entry had a similar layout: maps, schedules, security notes. They collected the notebook as evidence and sealed the bar for the night, telling me someone would be back in the morning to take more statements. In the days that followed, the investigation picked up fast. The detectives told me the guy was a repeat offender, someone who'd hit small businesses across 3 states. He'd spend days watching a place, learning who worked which shift, what time the doors locked, how often the police drove by. His notes were detailed, sometimes even more thorough than what the owners had on file. He'd apparently been parking near the bar for at least a week, blending in by changing clothes and using different vehicles. The police tracked his car to a gas station about 2 miles up the highway, where they found it abandoned behind a dumpster. The plates were fake, and the VIN number was scratched off. Inside, there were maps, cash, more notebooks, and a backpack full of burner phones and fake IDs. He'd switched names at every stop, paying for everything in cash and leaving almost no trail. They warned other businesses along the highway, sharing his description and the methods he used. By then, they knew he had warrants in several states: armed robbery, burglary, even assault. He never stayed in one place for long, but his pattern was always the same: watch, plan, wait for the perfect moment, then strike. The investigators showed me grainy security footage from another store that got hit 2 months earlier. Same cap, same sunglasses, same way of moving. It was definitely him. It was 2 days later when they caught him trying to rob a gas station in the next county. He'd used the same approach, watching the place from his car and waiting until just before closing. This time, the cashier recognized his face from the warnings and locked the doors before he could get inside. The police were already patrolling the area, and they caught him trying to slip out the back. He had a gun in his pocket and another notebook full of plans for other businesses. The officers charged him with attempted armed robbery, conspiracy, and a bunch of other crimes tied to the other states. He never said a word during his arrest, just stared at the ground while they put him in the car. After that night, the owner of Rodeo changed a lot of things. He installed more security cameras, added alarms to the doors and windows, and hired a second person for all night shifts. They put up warning signs and double-checked IDs before letting anyone stay after midnight. I kept working there, but the place didn't feel the same. Every late shift, I watched the doors and windows, checking the lot twice before walking out at the end of the night. I kept thinking about that panic button under the counter, how fast things could change, how close things had gotten. It taught me something about people who commit these kinds of crimes. It's never random. They plan and wait and pay attention to every little detail. Sometimes it's just luck that keeps you safe, or a silent alarm that brings help a few minutes faster than expected. After that, I never worked a shift without double-checking every exit and watching for anything out of place. That sense of safety never really came back, but I kept doing my job, always alert, knowing that sometimes the only thing between you and real danger is the quiet sound of a button pressed under the bar.